Well, good morning, Corporations Committee. Welcome to our second meeting of 2022. I guess let's start with roll call, and then we'll call up the Secretary of State's office and get into our morning agenda of elections issue. Ms. Talbot, if you'd call the roll.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. This is roll call for August 25th Joint Corporations Committee. Senator Boner.
Here.
Senator Case. Senator Nethercott.
Here.
Senator Scott.
Here.
Representative Blackburn. Here. Representative Burt. Representative Clausen. Here. Representative Duncan.
Here.
Representative Ayer. Here. Representative LeBeau. Here. Representative McGuire. Here. Representative Roscoe.
Here.
Co-Chairman Driscoll. Chairman Zwanser.
Here.
We have a quorum.
All right. Well, we have a quorum, and as you can tell, we have 3 members joining us who are in various cities planning for various events. I know one of them has a wedding coming up of the child tomorrow, and I think one of our members found out she had a death in her family this morning, so she may join us later but had to drive back home on short notice to deal with some family issues. So with that, we're a little smaller in person than usual, but we'll still get through our agenda today successfully. Maybe first up on our elections topic, we'll just have our state elections director, Mr. Schoen, come up. I think we're all very well aware we had an election last week in Wyoming, and so Mr. Schoen, maybe just a quick overview, any problems, concerns, maybe we could talk about what the new voter registration statistics are after that primary, maybe how many, if any, counties requested to count ballots early. That would be interesting information, as this is the first year we've allowed that. Anything else you'd like to share and the committee may like to ask? Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Kai Schoen, State Election Director, Secretary of State's Office, and good morning, committee. Yes, we did have an election that took place, as we all know, and at a super high level. The election was administered as well as every other election in the past, potentially even better, because we've put a lot of things in place even since 2020. A couple of notes that I wanted to bring to your all's attention, because it's just interesting facts and statistics. We had 182,232 voters that participated in this primary election, which is the highest voter turnout we've had in a primary election since 1994, and it's the most ballots cast ever in a primary election in the history of Wyoming. Another note is the registered voters we had just prior to the election is the most registered voters we've had before an election in the history of any Wyoming election, including generals. So there was quite a bit of attention, as we know, certainly some national coverage, and so all eyes on Wyoming. And so people heard, people listened, and people came out to the polls, and the voters certainly were heard on the ballot. A couple of things that I wanted to also mention is we had a couple of counties that had certain situations. For example, in Lincoln County, there was a community center in Thane that had lost power. There was a car that had crashed into a power line just nearby, and so these things do happen. Fortunately, our new voting equipment that we purchased in 2020, it has battery backups, which immediately kicked in. There was no interruption at all to voting. And also the emergency manager did get a generator in place just to be safe, but eventually the power was restored. And so we have procedures in place to address those issues as they come. We had another county that had a polling place that was flooded in the morning. There was a leak in one of the bathrooms, and so clean water, but nonetheless, they could not get that cleaned up in time. And so they ended up having to post notice that the polling place had changed. They got everything up and running by 7 a.m. and everything was great. In fact, we didn't even get a single phone call from a voter within that county. So county clerks are certainly prepared. They're up to the task as things come up that you don't expect. And lastly, I'd mentioned in Laramie County, there was at the Archer complex, there was a time where their tabulator actually got jammed. And so the staff at the polling place called the county clerk's office. The clerk's office said, this is what you need to do. There's an auxiliary bin on those ballot boxes for this purpose, which they opened that up so voters could put ballots into that auxiliary bin, which basically is a separate compartment where those ballots are held. And then when there's downtimes, this is also addressed in our rules, a bipartisan team of judges can take those ballots out and feed them back to the tabulator once that jam was cleared, which is what they did. And they looked at the count of ballots on the machine, looked at their poll books, and everything reconciled. And so that's always great news. But even beyond that, the county clerk, when those ballots did come back securely to their office, she exercised her authority to retabulate, which they have in the statutes, and it's for the strict purpose of reconciling. So they ran those ballots through a different tabulator and got the exact same result. And so I mention those things because there's lots of discussion, about just the integrity of our elections, and our clerks are up to the task. And even when things hit them that were unexpected, they were able to achieve a really well-run election, and one that we can certainly trust in. Another, in regards to your comment, Mr. Chairman, about those that processed early, and I don't even have the counties in front of me, but I know there was just a couple of counties that actually chose to do that. Most of our counties just figured they can handle an election night like they have done in most cases. So I think most of our county clerks are treating that as well, we've got a lot of absentee ballots. We definitely need to do this, but not just simply using it because they can. And so only a handful of counties, significantly less than we had in the 2020 election, which we authorized through directive, as you know. I know I've only got 5 minutes, but one other thing, if I could. This election, we did introduce a new post-election audit. You may not understand that our current election audit that's in the statutes simply audits 5% of the tabulators after the election. And they use the same test ballots that are used during the public test, which maybe some of you participated in, which are predetermined results. You want to see if it's tabulating correctly. You know what the results should be. And so that's what you hope to see, which we did. We had 100% accuracy on those tests prior to the election, 100% accuracy in the test after the election. And the idea is in between, when the election was taking place, we had 100% accuracy as well. But we wanted to go beyond that and not look at test ballots. And in fact, it was shortly after the primary election in 2020 that we started having conversations about, we want to look at the ballots that are actually being voted and see how are our tabulators adjudicating these ballots. And so since our office is not made up of mathematicians, we knew that we needed a statistically significant sample to say, we've got a 99% confidence level in the election result based upon this particular binomial distribution. So we worked with the University of Wyoming, particularly their mathematics and statistics division, and Professor Giroux, he's the director of their program in statistics. He's the one that was incredibly helpful, really eager to help us put something in place that we could say is statistically sound and count on. And so we used his calculator that he handed to us that we worked with, and we had all 23 counties look at their closest race down to the legislative race, and that was the race that was chosen to be put into the calculator to determine how big of a sample size do we need to look at to have the confidence level of a 99%. And so every county, we gave them what those results were and randomly selected ballots for them to audit. And so high level, we audited about 18,000 samples, which is a single race on a ballot, which translates into about 3,000 ballots. And all 3,000 ballots were adjudicated with 100% accuracy. So it's looking at the ballot, it's looking at the cast vote record, which is how the tabulator adjudicated it, and comparing the two, and there was no inconsistencies. And so that really speaks to the integrity of our equipment, and because there's been lots of discussion about whether or not we can trust in that. Well, I think after this election, I would hope that we can put that to bed and say we've got a system we can truly trust in. And with that, I would certainly answer any questions.
Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman.
And the mic, if you would. A little lower. Maybe not. Yep.
Mr. Chairman, not a question, but a comment. It seems to me that all of us in Wyoming owe a vote of thanks to our county clerks and to the Secretary of State's office for backing them up. I think the integrity of our elections has been a real strength in this state. I went to school in a state, Mr. Chairman, where that was not necessarily always true. And it is noticeable how fierce our county clerks are and how well, on the subject of election integrity, and how well our Secretary of State's office backs them up. And I just want to say publicly, thank you to all those people for the quality of work they do and for their dedication to keeping our elections on the straight and narrow.
Thank you, Senator Scott.
Other questions or comments, committee? I'm not seeing any right now, Mr. Schoen, but thank you for coming up and just giving us a quick overview, and we'll certainly hear from your officer in a bit. With that, committee, first up on our agenda is free and fair elections. LSO has provided a bill draft to discuss, 23 LSO 132, if you would pull that up. And I don't know, LSO, if you want to briefly talk about it, Mr. Anderson. I know there's people here in the audience who are willing to testify. But if you wouldn't mind giving us a high-level overview, welcome.
Mr. Chairman, Josh Anderson, LSO. Yeah, this bill discussed at our last meeting up in Hewlett. It was based on a 2019 resolution of the same name. And that was discussed at our last meeting as well. So this bill basically just implements that. I did revise the closing language on page 4. I don't know if you want me to go through all of the whereases. Can certainly read through those, but in the resolution language on page 4, I did make a slight revision there. It was kind of discussed at our last meeting. It was very broad at the end, where it just said, may regulate monies raised and spent for political persons by, or purposes by any person. And so I changed that slightly. I'll read through that, Mr. Chairman. It just says, Legislature of the State of Wyoming respectfully urges the Congress of the United States to propose and send to the states for ratification amendment to the U.S. Constitution consistent with the findings of this resolution, establishing a distinction between the rights of natural persons and the rights of corporations and other legal entities, and providing that Congress and state legislatures may regulate monies raised and spent for political purposes by corporations and other legal entities that are not natural persons. So that's the effect of the resolution. I take any questions.
Questions, committee? Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, as I read this the way it's currently drafted, this is not intended to be a call for a constitutional convention pursuant to Article 5. This is just a standard, Congress, we'd like you to do something kind of resolution. Is that correct?
That's correct, Mr. Chairman. Senator Scott, yes, that's correct. This wouldn't call for a full constitutional convention.
Further questions? Not seeing any. Thank you very much, Josh. People here to testify in favor of the draft, come on down. Welcome to corporations. Just name and where you're from.
Good morning. My name is Marcia Farias.
Oh, and if you would turn that mic on. Perfect.
When it's green. Okay. My name is Margie Farias, and I am from Lander. I am a board member of Wyoming Promise, which is a nonpartisan and grassroots organization. Excuse me, I'm trying to find my notes here. Here we go. Wyoming Promise seeks to address the problem of dark money in our political system. We see that the free speech of ordinary citizens is drowned out by dark money, and that Americans, including Wyomingites, want transparent and interactive representation that meets their needs and safeguards their rights. I'm here today to testify in favor of this draft resolution, LSO, is it 132? Yeah, okay. And I'm going to be reading the testimony of our chairman, Mr. Ken Chestick, who was unable to be here today due to conflicts with his teaching at the university in Laramie. So Mr. Chestic says that the resolution presented by LSO, Free and Fair Elections, is nearly identical to HJ 8 that was in the 2019 legislative session, and it was adopted by the House by a vote of 37, 20, and 3. The bill failed to pass the Senate Corporations Committee by a vote of 2 to 3. He notes basically what was read by this attorney about the changes in section 2, I think it is, of the resolution. So I won't repeat that. As you are all aware, the problem of dark money is becoming more acute with every passing election cycle. The nonprofit, nonpartisan watchdog group OpenSecrets.org reported last year that dark money spending exceeded $1 billion in the 2020 election cycle. That same report revealed that dark money supporting Democratic candidates was more than double the amount of dark money spent in support of Republican candidates. As a Democrat myself, I am not proud of that fact, and I fully support the efforts to rein in such spending. This is truly a bipartisan problem. The resolution before the committee today does not specify what the language of the amendment to the US Constitution would say, because it's not the job of this body. Article 5 of the Constitution, US Constitution, provides 2 means for proposing amendments. Number 1, Congress can propose amendments by a 2/3 majority of both chambers, or 2, a convention called by 2/3 of the states can propose amendments. This draft resolution today seeks only to invoke the first method. But since the Constitution clearly gives responsibility for drafting the amendment to Congress, the Wyoming legislature cannot specify the content of that. A possible compromise for this concern that LSO 132 supports an amendment that is not yet written could be to include language in the resolution that the Wyoming legislature is comfortable with. There have been several proposals for this language offered by various groups. One such proposal, written by the nonpartisan group American Promise, has been attached to the written testimony that I gave each of you a copy of here. This proposal, which is called For Our Freedom Amendment, has generated support from Republican legislators across our country. This language, of course, would not be binding on Congress, but could serve as a starting point for congressional drafting. An amendment to LSO 132 endorsing the For Our Freedom Amendment could be considered by this committee. So far, 22 states, including Alaska, Montana, Nevada, West Virginia, and many others, have passed resolutions calling on Congress to propose the amendment requested by this resolution. Some states, including Montana, have done so through voter initiative. The Montana resolution was adopted by 75% approval of the voters of that state. Most polls on this issue show popular support for the idea ranging between 75 and 90%. I have my own comments here. I'd like to say that 2 years ago, I made a presentation to the Lander City Council and asked for their support on this same resolution. At that time, there were over 800 municipalities across our country that had passed similar resolutions. The Lander City Council unanimously voted to give their support, as have the cities of Cheyenne, Laramie, and Gillette. In addition, the Wyoming Association of Municipalities also endorses this resolution. I'd also like to add that in 2017 and 2018, I personally collected well over 800 registered voter signatures for the Wyoming Promise petition for a ballot initiative. And recently, I canvassed in my neighborhood to encourage people to vote in this year's primary election, while also asking them to consider voting for a specific candidate for whom I was stumping. One man told me this: Wyoming is the most corrupt state I have ever lived in, and I've lived in many states. Now, I have no idea if his statement's accurate, and I didn't discuss it with him. My point is this. I've listened to a lot of people, and oftentimes these voters don't trust their politicians, and they don't believe that their vote counts, especially younger voters. This is a pretty sad state of affairs. I don't believe we can turn this situation around without making the changes that LSO 132 is proposing to initiate. I urge you today to adopt this resolution as a committee bill to be introduced in the upcoming general session. Thank you for hearing my testimony. I will take questions and answer them if I'm capable.
Thank you. Any questions, committee? Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, and it's partly a question and partly a statement. As the resolution sits before us right now, it, from my perspective, it goes a couple of steps too far, and is something I probably could not vote for. I would, at the same time, I think that there is a point here where the corporations, they're different from natural people, the perpetual existence possibility, the magnitude of the resources that some of them can lay their hands on. That's troubling to have a corporation treated that way, and maybe we need an ability that we've lost to regulate some of their spending in campaigns. And what I'm looking for is suggestions for ways to tame this down a bit. And how do the advocates feel about that? This looks like a wholesale attempt to overturn Citizens United.
Yes, sir.
And that's, I think the First Amendment to the Constitution has been and the free speech and free press, parts of that have been one of the great strengths of this country, and I'm reluctant to tamper with that on a wholesale basis. So what I'm looking for is from you or anybody else here, suggestions for finding some middle road here, Mr. Chairman.
Technically, we're still questioning you as a witness, so if you have any
Sure.
thoughts.
I do have a couple of thoughts,
Please.
Mr. Chairman. Senator Scott, first of all, we are addressing only the free speech part of the First Amendment, not the free press. That is not what we're considering here. Yes, I understand what you're saying, but what this amendment to the Constitution would do would give state legislators the opportunity to craft their own legislation that wouldn't be against the law, against, what Congress or what the Supreme Court has ruled on. We could craft whatever we want as a state to address the problem that we all know exists, that I brought up here and that you are acknowledging. So I think what you're having a problem with is that we don't have specific language. And of course, it's like I said, we can't do that. Only Congress can do that. And it would take a ratification process that's very arduous and long and thorough to cover any of these questions that you are feeling uncomfortable with. So I would say we need to start somewhere, and asking Congress to craft this amendment is the first step. there are many steps along the course of a final amendment that would make it so that you are comfortable with it. But like I say, we have to start somewhere. We all know that this is affecting not only the people who supposedly their vote is supposed to count, and it doesn't. If somebody else with more money, a lot more money, can influence policy, but it's also influencing people who are public servants, who are elected public servants, who spend well over half their time having to fundraise because it's requested. I mean required in order to get elected. I don't need to explain to you, gentlemen, this morning, but this is an insidious problem that has to be dealt with. And because it came down from the top, from the Supreme Court, it needs to be addressed with this big of a step. And we're a long way from getting there, but this is the first part of it.
Okay, Senator Boner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a clarifying question here. After reading this draft resolution, hearing the testimony, it's unclear to me whether you intend this constitutional amendment to be solely focused on changing the way that corporations interact with the election process, or if you're envisioning broader reform that distinguishes between corporations and natural persons, which would have business implications as well, liability, tax implications. It's not clear whether you want this constitutional amendment to extend into that realm as well. Could you clarify that, please?
Mr. Chairman, again, I don't have the legal background to completely answer that, but I would say that, again, what this amendment we're hoping does is just give the Congress and the states the ability to address that how they want to do it. Right now, it's against the law to draft any legislation that goes against this idea of money is free speech. So I can't distinguish what you're asking about, but I can say that as a legislator, you would have the option or have the opportunity to distinguish that in your own state. That's my understanding. I know that's vague, but again, we can't be the people that are drafting this, the content of this.
Other questions? You're reaching for your mic, Senator Case?
It's okay, Mr.
Go ahead.
How are you? This is my constituent. We've been working together on several things. And I'm warming up to this idea, but I haven't quite got there yet. And I keep having to look at the practical thinking about it. And I don't see this as just applying to Citizens United and the derivations of that. That's indirect expenditures by third parties. Supreme Court ruled in a way that said corporations could do that along with other organizations, unions, lots of things that are tied together. I mean, I'm looking at the draft, the AP alternative amendment language, and I realize that's just a thoughtful proposal and things, but I've always wondered how we would get around the First Amendment in a proposal, and we get around it in Section 2 that says, nothing in this Constitution shall be construed to forbid Congress or the states within their respective jurisdictions from reasonably regulating and limiting contributions and spending in campaign elections or ballot measures. Doesn't say anything about corporations. So that just clashes with that free speech part, where previous rulings have ruled that money is speech. So that's just a huge So that means the First Amendment wouldn't apply to anything here, if I read the proposed amendment right. So the First Amendment's out the window. Everything else in the Constitution is out the window. The only thing that we have security in is something called reasonably regulating and limiting contributions. So that's a little bit scary. I mean, I think that could apply to individuals. I think it could apply to anything. Help me with this. It's not just corporations as I see it.
Right. I'm not following your reasoning about throwing out the Constitution on that statement, but
Can I follow up just a little bit?
sure,
This is that proposed
right,
three-piece, you guys have all seen it, right?
right.
The second one, I've always wondered how we would do this and not pay attention to the First Amendment. How we would get around that. And I knew there would be, in our legislative language, we sometimes use notwithstanding or irregardless of anything else. You guys do it here in section 2 where you say, nothing in this Constitution shall be construed to do this. So that just says all the rest of the Constitution goes away and we can do whatever we want with this. I mean, that's the way I read this. And it can apply to any kind of speech.
How would you like it to read?
Well, that's a great,
I bet he'll have a chance for amendments if, at the appropriate time.
well, and that's just it, Mr. Chairman. The resolution doesn't actually specify the language. We're saying, Congress, this is our idea, or this is somebody's idea. Come up with the language, and the truth is, states have to ratify whatever language that Congress comes up with. That's the great safety net. So it's not as harmful to try to do something. But section 2 of this proposed language throws out the US Constitution, says it doesn't apply, and we can do, and Congress can do whatever we want in this area. That's pretty huge. Do you think I'm right or not?
I don't know that
Yeah.
I'm not trained legally to pick that apart
Yeah.
that way.
You're sharp. I've worked with you. She is.
Well,
But I think that that could be worded to say perhaps that the Supreme Court rulings,
Mhm.
and I don't know exact wording of that ruling myself, but will not stand in the way of changing
Yeah.
or giving state legislators, say, the opportunity to create some regulation.
Mr. Chairman, what we might do, if we were actually, I can conceive of a resolution that's written where we put, hey, Congress, this is what we would approve. This is the language. If it's close to this, go forward. And instead of having this section 2, you talk about what you really would like to limit. Independent expenditures on campaigns, perhaps, or corporate expenditures, or other things. Maybe what we've done, I disagree with the interpretation that the Supreme Court says that corporation stuff is unregulated. We require disclosure, and disclosure has been upheld. Some people aren't disclosing very well in their third-party things, but that is required under Wyoming law and elsewhere. So there is some connected regulation, but section 2, as it's written in the proposal, is very broad, agreeing that we all saying, Congress, we're just saying you come up with something and then we'll ratify it. So I think it's getting closer, but
Okay,
I'm trying. I really am.
all right.
any other questions for the witness? Senator Scott, you have another? I know Mr. Chestic's not here because he's teaching, but he was just elected to what, District 13? He won his primary, so
His primary, yes.
we might get him in the House to move the effort. There you go.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, I'm not as up to date as I might be, and some other members are, as to exactly what is permitted in the way of requiring identification and any ability under the current Supreme Court decisions, particularly Citizens United, I gather we can still require identification of contributions, but I don't think we can forbid, can we, the expenditures that are not identified that are coming from outside? I'm unclear on that.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Scott, I think the extent of our law in this area is that we require disclosure. That has to say who did it. It might be a corporation. I think we did that. Josh, I'm going to need some help when you get around to it.
Sure, go ahead, Mr. Anderson.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I would have to do a little more research on this, so I'm not quite up on all the ins and outs on that.
Doesn't require the identity of the individual. I'm sorry. It does not require, like the corporation or whoever, or the union or whoever the deals would have to have identify who made the expenditure. It doesn't require their donors or where their contributions come from, nothing like that.
Mr. Chairman, so we can require and say who did it, and then if it identifies itself as the XYZ Committee for Good Government, we don't have any ability to find out who that really is. Is that my understanding of the current state of affairs?
Mr. Chairman, I believe that is correct. Yeah, and the Secretary of State's office may be able to weigh in on this as well, but I believe that's true.
Okay, and Mr. Chairman, I would say that is the source of my discomfort with the current state of the law after the Supreme Court decisions. We need to be able to trace those contributions back to which individuals or which known large corporations, and figuring out the exact language would be a problem. But
Mr. Chairman and Senator Scott, you're absolutely right. And it isn't just corporations. It can be foreign governments. It can be anything. And if there's no transparency, then who's to say who's creating policy in our country, in our state, in our cities? That's the problem. And it's so construed and secretive now. That's why it's called dark money, that nobody really knows what the answers are. Our attorneys, our legislators, we're in the dark. We just are. And ordinary citizens, they've just about lost hope. They don't think it matters anymore.
For the
Your
questions.
constituents,
Sorry.
every one of you, your constituents, they don't know. And they're getting to the point where they don't really care anymore. Anyway, thank you for hearing my testimony.
Thank you for being here.
And I'll try and take any more questions if there are any.
I'm just guessing there might be 4 or 5 other people
Okay.
behind you who are going to testify, or at least are here in support.
There are other people that want to testify, yes.
You can leave it. Thanks. Other people here to testify on 132. Ma'am. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of this very important committee, and those of you who are online.
Nope, it's on now. You got it. You're good. We can remotely do it, apparently.
I appreciate our citizen legislators, and I know your jobs are becoming increasingly more difficult. My name is Chris Corfonta, and I've lived in Sheridan County since 1980. My only interest in traveling to present here today is to improve our country and our state. I've worked on, as a volunteer, on this issue since 2017. These buttons we are wearing is what, from 2017. We have very little money, but we have a lot of passionate people. The reason I continue to work on this issue is because I'm convinced that the unbelievable sums of money poured into our political system is the root cause of what's eroding our representative democracy in 3 ways. It increases division in our society. Negative campaigning, especially last-minute negative campaigns, which create attacks on individuals with the common strategy is to attack them at last-minute times, so they have no desire, they have no opportunity to address the attacks. Another thing that's eroding our democracy is this money decreases the ability of Congress to meet the needs of their constituents. It is well known that they spend more time working to raise money for the next campaign than they are working for us common citizens. And the other thing that I think this inordinate amount of money does in our political system is it creates cynicism and anger among ordinary Americans and Wyomingites, who are Americans, of course. We see the pay-to-play influences and crony capitalism winning at the expense of ordinary citizens. I'm going to cut out some of my testimony because you have a long day, 2 days. But we don't see much progress for American people, no matter which party is in power. When I want to just, some people aren't going to talk, but some of the ladies here, raise your hand if you carried a petition or worked on this issue. None of us are paid. We just care. I provided a handout, and I think you guys online might not have gotten it yet. It has 2 sides. I'd like to draw your attention to this side, which has the results of our citizens initiative. We were all volunteers across the state. 5 counties were really well organized, and that's why you're probably hearing from constituents in these counties, because we worked really hard and got more than the threshold amount for our counties. In almost all the other states that allow citizens initiatives, the numbers that we did get across the state would have put this on the ballot. So this draft resolution is similar to our petition, and I can't address the changes. In fact, this proposed resolution I didn't know about till today, so I only know what was put on wyoleg.gov. We're not terribly well organized group, but we're a very passionate group. My personal experience gathering signatures really made me feel good about my community. I can't tell you how many hours and doors I knocked on or how many public events I went to, and I am an introvert, so it was very difficult for me to do. But from my experience, of every 10 people I asked to sign the petition, 8 would sign. And the reasons that people gave that they would not sign is, number one, they weren't registered to vote. The other reason is they don't sign anything. And then I've heard a few people, oh, good luck with that. You can't make a difference. Everybody else, Republican, Democrat, Independent, young, old, rich, poor, were signing the petition. So if we had big money behind us, we would have been able to pay canvassers and get it on the ballot. If we had big bucks behind us, we could hire our own lobbyists, which we did one time, and we can't afford to pool our money to hire a lobbyist again. It's almost to the point, sometimes I feel like giving up, but I'm not going to. Usually, every time this issue is brought up, there's a paid lobbyist arguing against our cause. I'd like you to take a look at the other side that I printed off last night, and I gave you, there's a link so you could go to the whole document. But it's where they're mostly congressional candidates, where they got their money from, and this is the most recent. And I want to make a note that this does not include dark money, which cannot be tracked, and it doesn't have to be registered. And it doesn't include just ordinary PAC money. Now, Wyomingites don't like to be told by other states what to do, but look at where most of the documented money comes from: other states. Now, dark monies are kind of like shell companies that launder drug money. We don't know what other money was poured into the campaign in, I forget, they call it in a non-coordinated way, but most of that money is used in attack ads. As stated before, we don't even know if there are foreign influences. But here we see California, Florida, Texas, Virginia, and New York really having an influence on our campaigns. Now below shows the in-state versus percentage of out-of-state contributions that the top people running for office got. And as you could see, the majority of the contributions come from out of state. So how do I, who can only give, someone like me, he gives 25 bucks to somebody's campaign, have the same kind of voice that these big moneyed interests have? How do ordinary citizens get their voices heard? So I know this resolution won't solve all problems, but supporting it as a committee bill is one small thing you can do to show us ordinary citizens, along with these 20,000 plus people who signed a petition, that our voice matters over big moneyed interests that drown ours out. It is a states' right issue too. Our state doesn't have the ability to regulate this. So as was said earlier, this is a start. It's not the answer. It's just a resolution that you are willing to say, we got to do something about it. We don't know the final bill, the final answer. It's years down the road. But I urge you, please, to stand up for those of us who are about ready to give up, but we're not gonna give up. So thank you. And I hope you don't have complicated questions for me.
Questions, Mr. Corfant? Let's go to Senator Boner first.
Okay, thank you. I'll try to make this simple. I'm sure you'll do just fine. So what I understand, it's not just corporate, you're not just concerned about corporations. giving to these, uncoordinated PACs. It could be an individual, it could be a political nonprofit, it could be any number of entities or even individuals that are part of this dark money problem. And is that correct?
Mr. Chair, to address that, I think it's all of the above. I think the scariest part or the biggest unknown are the ones that we do not know who is behind the money, and we can't find out. That's the biggest concern. But there is a concern that a billionaire can influence statewide politics by threatening to withhold or, reward legislators for following their wishes.
Yeah, I think, I understand what we're getting at, and it doesn't necessarily match up with the resolution we have in front of us because it focuses solely on corporate, things. I think maybe if we do move forward, we might have to just have a more broader resolution that deals with dark money, not just focusing on one part of the, potential source of these contributions. It could be a union, it could be anything. If we are going to move forward, that's one comment. Sorry, it's related for the comment section, but I think that's an important distinction.
Mr. Chair, I understand what was just said. My understanding that these 501c4 groups can be technically considered corporations. And I don't know if unions can be considered corporations, but I think this incorporates all of that.
Your resolution on, line 6 and 17, it's corporations and other legal entities that are not natural persons, and natural persons are already in there. So I think it is kind of broad. But ultimately, you're asking for the state to be able to play a role in voting and political decisions, which is our right, in my mind, under the 10th Amendment, and in all other aspects of voting, besides a couple of Supreme Court amendments. And they seem to be being knocked out more and more lately, going back to states' rights. So I would focus on that for your group, and I think that's a better argument for me. But other questions for Ms. Corfonta? Senator Scott?
Yes. We always bring the same microphone.
Yeah, I have difficulties with it. Mr. Chairman, let me say first, Ms. Corfonta called me last night and happened to catch me right when I was preparing on this particular item, and was very useful in pointing out a few things. So thank you. I have a problem. If you look on page 3 of the resolution, it says lines 15 through 17. Says, whereas Congress, state legislatures, and local legislative bodies should have the authority to regulate political contributions and expenditures. Mr. Chairman, as that's written right now, I think as a practical matter, you could substitute the word suppress for regulate. And that's the essence of the problem that I have with this resolution. Let me try some language I've been playing with to change that. And after authority, get rid of the rest of that to regulate political contributions and expenditures. And then this is a little more wordy, but I want to try it in the witness and see what she thinks. Okay. Put in then to, after authority, put in to require the public identification of the source of political contributions or expenditures for or against any candidate, and to limit or prohibit corporations or other entities, not natural persons, from making campaign contributions and expenditures for or against any candidates. Period. New sentence. political expenditures by organizations made up of natural persons which publicly identify their members and donors should not be restricted. And I don't pretend, Mr. Chairman, that I've got the language right, but what I'm trying to get at is that we ought to be able to find out what people, not what organizations, but what people the money is coming from. And we ought to be able to say, to put some limits on what the non-natural, the corporate, you know, that's what I'm trying to do. And so I would like to hear from Ms. Grafana and frankly from other witnesses as they come up, how they would think about that sort of a narrowing of this resolution.
Mr. Chair, I thank Senator Scott for his concern and for him working on this. I'm a visual learner, so when I heard all that, I can, understand and my gut feeling, that sounds great, but I would have to read it to be able to know better. I am wondering if those kinds of changes could be made in the, during the legislative session, and you guys could just pass this as a committee bill now, or I don't know if it could, these things can be put in and talked about and still have time to support it as a committee bill.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead, Senator Case.
it's always better to do it in the committee. We have more time. We have another meeting. I really think Senator Scott's onto something important here, if you guys think about it. Really what he's saying is we don't want to regulate the free speech of natural people. And if natural people identify themselves when they band together, despite what the organization looks like, fair. Could be a corporation, could be a union, whatever. His language accomplishes that, but what it does not do is accomplish what the section 2 of the illustrative draft that I got from Mr. Chesnick is that it says nothing in this Constitution shall be construed to forbid Congress, the states with their respective jurisdictions from reasonably regulating, limiting contributions and spending in campaigns. That says nothing about natural persons, corporations. That is scary language to me, because that says the Constitution doesn't apply and let's make it all up now. So I really like Senator Scott's idea, and when it comes appropriate time, if we get a motion on it, I'd help to move it. And we can work it out in the next committee meeting, let people look at it.
Mr. Chairman?
Wouldn't you agree? Go ahead, Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, question for the committee chairman.
Yeah.
Is your intent to deal with this issue in final today or at the next meeting?
I would say it was my intent to finish it out today and not move it over, but if the committee thinks they want to work on language and that would behoove the bill, then yeah, whatever the motion will be at the time, we'll go with. So if the motion is to amend and continue to work on it till October, and that's the motion that's supported, we'll do that. Someone wants to make a motion for kicking it as a committee bill now, we can do that at the appropriate time.
Should we hear the rest of this?
We will. I'm just in the appropriate time. Okay, other questions, Mr. Cravanta?
No, thank you very much. You'll see me again. I want to talk about the free and fair elections bill too.
All right. Thanks.
Thank you.
Other people wish to testify on this bill, come on down.
Is this on? Yes. Okay. My name's Barbara Chase. I'm also from Sheridan and another member of Wyoming Promise. And I'm been scribbling all over my little speech while I've been listening to this conversation. I do think Senator Scott, first off, Mr. Chairman, thank you to the whole committee for listening to us today. I really think you're hitting on one of the things that I was going to talk about, which is transparency. That's essential. There is so much distrust in the political process that I feel, because we know that there's a lot of money that come into campaigns, and I'm not talking about the people in this room necessarily, I'm talking generally, that we know there's a lot of money coming from not only super PACs and these 501c4s, but also wealthy individuals with an agenda that doesn't necessarily serve the best interests of most Wyoming people. And I'm not sure that we don't, and I understand free speech, that we don't want to squash people's free speech, but if we allow a billionaire heiress to funnel $1 million or $2 million into somebody's campaign in this state because she has a certain agenda, that squashes the free speech essentially of the individuals in this state, because we can't amass the interest that that person's getting because of their dollars. So I don't think that limiting the amount of money that one person can do limits their speech. You're still allowed to put some money in, maybe not so much money. And I'm going to probably can most of what I said, but I do feel that when I came to Wyoming in 1978, I thought it was a pretty conservative state, but it was moderate enough that we were willing to occasionally vote in a Democratic governor, or 2 or 3 since I've been here, Democratic senators. And people's politics were more moderate. And I think what's happened over the last 10 years since Citizens United and this flood of unregulated, anonymous money into political discourse has fed the fringes, the radicals in a lot of ways, for somebody else's agenda, not the people of Wyoming. And I think it's poisoned it. And I think we need to get back to where that isn't being fed to the public, and that we can get back to people wanting to compromise on both sides of the aisle. And for 2 years, I worked on the same campaigns. We collected about 2,700 signatures in Sheridan County out of the 20,000 that were garnered statewide. And based on the responses that I received, and I got about 300 of those signatures. When I was getting signatures, I can assure you that this bill, the essence of this bill, the spirit of this bill, will have strong bipartisan support. You know, I've seen the effects of this last minute dark money that comes into politics, and somebody gets a flyer on their door or a phone message at the very last minute from some anonymous group from wherever it's coming, that lies to people or misrepresents somebody's position, and there's no time for a rebuttal of that. That's the sort of thing all of us don't want to have happen. And I just believe the Supreme Court was wrong to make that decision so broadly that it allows for this unregulated anonymous money. But I believe this bill, in some form with Senator Scott's additions to it, but also limiting the amount of money that wealthy individuals can put into campaigns, would go a long way to toning down the nasty rhetoric that's happening in campaigns and make people feel more trusting in the process. So I urge you to support a version of this bill, and I thank you very much. And I once again hope you don't have any really complicated questions for me. I'm not a lawyer.
Any non-complicated questions?
Senator Scott.
It's going to turn on in just a second for you. And go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, the question I have for you is on the question of the wealthy individuals. that one frankly scares me a bit. There are a bunch of competing forces in the society. The wealthy individuals are clearly not a united bloc. You,
Party or the other. I'm sorry.
Mr. Chairman, for every Soros on the left, there's a Cook Brothers or something on the right. Why is it the fact that when Mr. Chairman, there is this balance and the freedom of people to strike a balance, why do we want to restrict the ability of any individual to spend money to advocate for a political concern, as long as we know where it's coming from?
If you want that question, you're welcome to have it. If not,
Senator Scott, well, I do understand that there are limits in the state on individual campaign contributions that are direct competition. So that is one regulation on the speech of the individual. I have some specific people I have in mind, and I honestly don't know quite how their money came into the system, whether it was through 501c4s or super PACs. So I don't know, but I don't know. I just feel that people or entities that have vast amounts of money get a lot more attention than the average person. I mean, I think that's just reality. And I think it needs to be moderated immensely
Other questions?
without tamping down somebody's free speech rights.
Go ahead, Senator Case.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. So you're exactly correct in that if you have an election and a candidate accepts contributions, that can certainly be regulated. It's regulated in Wyoming. There are amounts. It's the same thing for ballot measures. I can't remember exactly how that works. But there are other issues that aren't necessarily regulated. If you don't want a freeway in front of your house, and maybe you're not wealthy, but you decide that you want to put every dime you can possibly raise to fight that freeway, America lets you do that, and maybe you end up putting $100,000 in that, which dwarfs what anybody else puts in, but it's okay to do that. And maybe you had to get a lien on your house and, but that's free speech. And it sounds okay in that circumstance, but if there's a wealthy heiress who wants to do the same thing with respect to the issue of abortion, do we want to get in the world of limiting that kind of thing? If it's not a ballot measure, but it's influencing people about that, that's scary. There's a disconnect because you're all saying, we had no problem raising the signatures. If we had more time, everybody supports this. But nobody knows what they're supporting. I don't know what we're supporting. It's the vagueness that just destroys me on this. And everybody says, well, we don't want their speech, but we want their speech, or we don't want these entities, but but it's very vague. Senator Scott's got at least a proposal that deals with some of the vagueness.
Well, and I think that.
Go ahead.
I
think
So could we
apologize.
start with that? And then the individual monies, that's really dangerous ground. And somebody could propose being able to limit individuals, but that's kind of dangerous ground.
Would you agree?
I think so.
Other questions? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you for your time.
Anyone else wish to testify for or against draft 132? Not seeing any currently. Oh, Mr. Irvin. Chairman Irving, come on down.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I actually don't have any comments on the bill itself. If it's okay, I'd like to just make a quick comment about free and fair elections in general, if be allowed. Mr. Chairman, thank you for this opportunity, and thank you to Senator Scott for his compliments to the county clerks at the onset. My name is Malcolm Irvin. I have the honor of serving as the president of the County Clerks Association of Wyoming. Our association represents 23 county clerks and their offices who administer a number of public services, including the actual boots-on-the-ground administration of elections. In the wake of the 2022 primary election, I wanted to take a moment to inform this committee that our 23 county clerks delivered a free and fair election to their home counties, not just in this most recent election, but in all those preceding it. This was done with the help of thousands of election judges, tight-knit relationship between our offices and the Secretary of State, the constant support from this committee, the professionalism of hundreds of clerk staff, and the indelible dedication to that cause by our 23 county clerks. Any insinuation that the members of our association purposely or by apathy neglected the duties of their office to deliver free and fair elections is simply not true. At this point, I should certainly mention that we do not believe this bill casts any doubt on Wyoming elections. In fact, most occasions we would not comment. This is a question of policy, not a question about administrability, but I couldn't resist the opportunity in case somebody in YouTube land was tuning in to hear about free and fair elections and not assure them that that is what we have in Wyoming. There's no question that improvements in our election system and administration can always be made. Public service is a constant exercise in improvement to deliver the highest level of service that the people of this state deserve. We believe that we have delivered the highest standard in election administration, but also believe that iron sharpens iron. This year, we have seen more people attend public tests of voting equipment, more folks asked to serve as election judges, more attendance in post-election audits, and more interest in county canvassing. This involvement is essential, and if we are to continue delivering that high standard of election administration, it must continue. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for allowing me this opportunity to sidetrack your meeting. But again, I want to thank you and your committee for your continued support for our offices.
Thank you from the Clerks Association, and congrats on on successfully getting through the 2022 primary. I think Senator Scott's going to have a question. Yes. There you go.
Mr. Chairman, am I right in thinking that you don't like the free and fair elections catch titles to this bill? And frankly, I share that because until I read it, I thought this was going to be a bill of very different nature. What would you think of retitling this one as not free and fair elections, but dark money in elections?
Mr. Irvin, if you have thoughts, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Senator Scott, I have to admit, when I first saw the title, I assumed it would be something administration. And to my delight, that was not the case. I have no opinion. Our association has no opinion about the title. Again, this is a policy decision for your committee, but we just appreciate the opportunity and faith. But Mr. Chairman, free and fair elections is an awfully vague title. And so perhaps a more specified title would be preferred.
Okay. Other questions, the county clerks? Don't go too far. We're going to have you here all morning.
We look forward to it all day.
Mr. Chestic did enter the chat, and so Ken, I'm not sure if you heard most of the testimony. Your comments were read, but if you did have any comments for a couple of minutes, we'll give you the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate, as I think I put in my testimony, I was teaching a class this morning, just got back to my office 15 minutes ago, so I missed a lot of the discussion, so I apologize for that. But I do have a few comments on things I just heard in the last 15 minutes. First of all, I appreciate the comments of the Chief of the Clerks Association. Absolutely, we have no problem at all whatsoever with the way Wyoming elections are administered. We think they are administered fairly. I do personally think they're administered fairly. It's We don't have a problem with that here, and that is obviously not the intent of this bill at all. So I have no problem changing the name. Just as a matter of history, the name was sort of inserted 6 years ago by LSO when we drafted the first thing, and we just kind of kept it. But I'm not married to that name at all, and we're happy to change the title of the bill to something that is going to be more descriptive of what it's all about. I have no problem with that at all. I do want to make a comment also to the concept. I think it was Senator Scott who made a comment that both sides are doing this, so why not let them all do it? And I don't think that's a logical conclusion. The fact that both sides do it, and both sides do it, there's no question. I put that in my testimony. The Democrats are maybe even better at it than the Republicans, but the fact that both sides do it doesn't make it right. Neither side should do it is the point. And the point is that this money we don't know where the money is coming from. It's the darkness of the money. The 501c4s that hide their donors and hide who's really behind this. This money could be coming from anywhere. A lot of it, we're pretty sure a lot of the money that's being spent in Wyoming is coming from out of state. Is it coming from out of the country? We don't know. There's no way to trace it. So all we're doing with this bill, all we're proposing with this bill is to create the ability to find that out. If we have the ability to impose regulations on all monies being spent and disclosure, much stronger disclosure rules, we need to have an amendment to the U.S. Constitution to allow that to happen, and that's all we're trying to do. That's what I'm just responding to what I heard in the last 15 minutes. If anybody has any questions for me about anything else, I'm happy to answer at this point.
Any questions for Mr. Chestic? Seeing none. Thank you very much, Ken. Any other further comments or questions from the audience? Ma'am, yep. If you want to present to the committee, you should definitely come up here and use the microphone. I think there's 90-some people online watching us. Welcome.
Committee, and my name is Jacqueline McMahon, and I am here with my fellow shared knights. And I too have been working on this since 2017. And I have other points I'd like to make, and they're so intrinsically entwined, but I'm going to take part of my testimony for my second presentation to present here. I am not only part of Wyoming Promise, I'm a Presbyterian woman, and in the Presbyterian Church, we are united with women all around the world. And we have something that is called the least coin. And we present, regardless of what country we come from, we present a least coin into the pot so that no country and no group has power or precedence, or their voice is more important than another. I have also joined with the Quakers in part of my spiritual activity, and they have a principle of respecting even the smallest voice. And I think that that is something that should be a consideration in our political and government arena. And we do have in our own constitution in Wyoming, I think it's Article 1, Section Article 1, Section 27, that states that elections are to be free and equal, and that nothing should interfere, prevent the untrammeled right of suffrage. And I do think, and I'm going to go on further, I followed some of you into the sandbox, and I'm in your last legislative session, and I'm not sure I understood what you were doing there, but I'd like you to go to the playground with me and sit on what I call a political seesaw. And that is that when I was a little girl, most of my learning came from playing on the playground and what was a good way of playing. And on the seesaw, I was always a stocky little thing, and my best friend was this darling little skinny ballerina. And we managed to balance and work together and sing songs on the seesaw because I moved up toward the middle and she could be out on the fringe. And I think in our political situation as a two-party system, we have lost the ability to come toward the middle to accommodate all the voices. And I think money has been one of those factors that has kept us from governing and reaching solutions that are beneficial to the common good. Questions?
No questions? Not seeing any. But
Okay.
certainly thank you for coming up and driving all the way down from Sheridan today, hopefully, or this morning. I don't know if you did it last night or this morning, but
This morning.
excellent. All right, further questions, comments from public testimony? Mr. Pizzell? Oh, I thought you were going to come up. Nope, have a good morning. All right, anyone else? I think that was going to be an interesting one. Okay, seeing no further comments, we'll close public comment. Committee, what is your pleasure on the bill?
I'll move the bill.
Okay, draft 1 through 2 has been moved. I assume there's a second, seconded by Air. Discussion on the bill, who wants to start? Senator Case, since you moved it, go ahead.
I'd also get rid of all the whereases in the front. I'd narrow this thing down, but, and then I'd like to just put it out there for people to look at till the next meeting, and I don't want to move it on today.
Go ahead, Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, I agree with Senator Case. What I would like to do to the bill would be, frankly, I think the free and fair elections catch title is a problem. I think I'd label it just political expenditures. That's what we're talking about.
Do you want to move that and we'll just hit these real quick?
Okay.
So moved? Political expenditures?
No, I don't want to try to work the bill today. I just want to explain
Okay.
what I would do. I would drop most of the whereases. I think that the one about the corporations, which is page 3, lines 7 through 13, is useful in explaining what we're up to. So I'd like to keep that. I'd like to keep the one lines 15 through 17, change it a bit and use my language, not there, but back in section 1. One of the reasons I don't want to do it today, there's a little more drafting here.
Let me make sure Ms. Johnson is catching all these, or one of LSO. Okay.
Okay,
keep
and
going.
I'll work with the LSO on it.
And Senator Scott, are you going to catch other organizations besides corporations? You mentioned you want to retain the whereas 7 through 13. We
Yeah.
could modify that to say corporations and other legal entities and something like that.
Yeah,
Okay,
I need to play with that language a bit.
go for it.
And I think it's not so much privileges, but simply because they aren't limited in life, they have certain abilities that the rest of us just don't have. And the ability to mass more money than most of us can. So I want to play with the language there and have something the committee could then play with further, work on. But get rid of most of the other whereases. Maybe keep the one at the bottom of page 3 and the top of page 4, maybe not. And use the language that I read, and I'll read it again if anybody wants me to. We use that language back. I think it probably belongs in section 1 in place of the language, some of the language that's there now. So Mr. Chairman, that's what I would propose we do. And do you want a formal motion to that effect, or do you want further discussion?
I guess any discussion at this point on Senator Scott's suggestions, if that seems like an okay place to go, committee. I don't think anyone's chomping the bit to get it passed today if we have another meeting in October. So if there's room for, some amendments and better language for people to feel more comfortable and get this thing to session, I don't see any concerns with that. Are there any other suggestions, concerns from the committee? Go ahead, Senator Boner.
Mr. Chairman, I understand that nonprofits are corporations technically, but I think we could make that language a little bit clearer. I think it's slanted unnecessarily towards those one types of corporations, and it doesn't say anything about individuals, which we're concerned about as well. So I think I don't have a solution right now, but even on page 4, lines 12 through 15, establishing a distinction between the rights of natural persons and the rights of corporations, it seems to me that it could be interpreted to have implications far beyond just elections, and we need to, I'd say, strike that. So let's make sure this is a little bit more even keeled, even though I'm sure we could, make that technical argument that, a nonprofit's a corporation. Is that what people are going to understand when they read the text of the bill? So just a general comment there.
Anyone else? LSO got most of those, and then Senator Scott will provide you some more language. And if we can get that to, I guess, is it still called the Wyoming Promise Working Group? I'm sure Mr. Chestick, Ms. Carfonda, some others would appreciate kind of what that might look like and have some voice in the discussion as we work through it. And so perhaps on email or phone before our next meeting.
So does Senator Scott now constitute a subcommittee?
A one-man subcommittee?
He could handle it.
I don't think, but go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, what I would probably not very long, type up a draft substitute bill, send it to LSO for their work, and have them send it to distribute it to anybody else that wants to see it, and particularly to the advocates out here and to syndication, anybody else that wants it, so that we can have a look at it. And then we'd have something we could work from at the next meeting.
Mr. Chairman, I like that idea. And this is what happens when you get the old brain a pacemaker, you guys. Look out.
I'm glad we're taking. I would note that last week they did discover that one donor gave 1.6 billion to an organization that at least some people fear may be used for nefarious political purposes. So it was certainly all over the news last week that it was stupefying and by far the largest known contribution to an alleged dark money political group. So things are getting weirder and weirder out in the election world, as we're all aware. All right, with that, I don't know, there was a motion on the floor, so I guess ultimately the motion is to move the bill draft to the next meeting with those proposed amendments, perhaps to the point of a substitute bill. That'll be the motion. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed say no. I saw 2 ayes on the Zoom as well, so.
Were those ayes or noes? Because the timing, they're kind of elect.
They were just waiting. I think Senator Nethercott and Representative Roscoe, were those both, that was an agreeable motion, and I vote from both of you? I'm seeing head nods and thumbs up.
Thumbs up.
All right.
Just the timing of it came in late.
Okay. Committee, because we do have some people that want to testify remotely on the ranked choice and open primary ideas. I know we do have 2 other drafts in front of us on ballot order and vacancies in elective office, but because I do have some people who are showing up, I would like to just jump over to the runoff elections and talk about our election process. I think we're all aware, and I'm not sure if we have the exact number, Secretary of State's office, of what the current number of registered Republicans is in the state after the primary. I know we had it before the primary, but it's fair to say it's above 70%. I'm just looking for a head nod. You don't have to come up. Okay. So I think as everyone on this committee and probably in the state is aware, when you have 70% from one party, that the primary election becomes vitally important in many, many of our races. And so I continue to hear the drumbeat, the cry, what you want to call it, from almost all sides on we need to do something with our primaries, whether that's a runoff primary, whether that's a jungle, whether that's ranked choice. I know this committee spent a substantial amount of time last year, also during redistricting, trying to figure out what a better process was, and us not moving forward for failure to get a majority of votes on either side. So based on popular demand, some direction, having the discussion again, if there is a direction the committee might want to pursue when it comes to a different election process for 2024, on how we deal with the primary, and whether that looks like a runoff election, an open primary, if ranked choice has evolved to the point where enough states are using it. That's kind of the discussion we're jumping into, and I'm waiting for at least 2 or 3 people that have asked to speak to be jumping on Zoom. So maybe we can just open the conversation up. If anybody wants to jump in the fray first, ma'am, come on back. And so right now we don't have any actual bills. This is really kind of a conversation for 30 minutes. If this committee wants to ask for one of those bill drafts to come back and for us to consider it in 2023, if it's going to become an interim topic, I think everyone in the committee is well aware that most of us on the House side are not coming back to this committee. Perhaps one is what it looks like. So I'm not sure on the Senate, but it'll be a vastly new committee next year. And so trying to decide if we want to push this while the knowledge base is still here. Welcome back. Go ahead.
Well, thank you. And thank you, Chair and Committee, for having me. And I'm happy to come back to a new committee later on. I'm going to speak on behalf of LSO 220058 ranked choice voting. My name is Jacqueline McMahon, and I'm here today from Sheridan, Wyoming, to represent a promise made to me 60 years ago. And so now you're going to find out, and this is if you are good at adding that large of numbers. Mrs. Dorothy Enzi packed 2 station wagons loaded with giggling curved bar Girl Scouts to Cheyenne to witness our legislative government in action. I was one of those young women whom she impressed with a sense of civic responsibility and the importance of voting. She assured us that our vote would matter. For many in our state, Mrs. Enzi's promise is an empty one. I would like you to change that by supporting the ranked choice voting bill as it presently stands. And that is inclusive of all parties. Following my retirement and the responsibilities of raising a family, I've served my county as an election judge. I've witnessed the disillusionment of voters eager to cast their vote for candidates of their choice, only to discover that they are only entitled to vote for members of the city council or in the county are given a blank ballot. I too have witnessed, I'm going to take you back to the playground and to the seesaw. And I believe we are all more than our party platform. I am a composite of a whole number of very divergent ideas. And I think it's very important to have a creative problem-solving approach. I think that there are intrinsic problems with a 2-party either-or system. And that is, it's very easily destabilized. And I talked to you about my little chunky body and my lightweight friend, but I was willing to accommodate her by moving my weight toward the center in order that she could still be represented. And we do have a tradition in our country of minority support. And that is, our state of Wyoming has 2 senators. We have fewer population than small cities in any other state. And yet we are given an equal voice in the Senate. In the state of Wyoming, if you are an unaffiliated voter, you do not have that kind of power. And more people are disenfranchised and don't believe that either party really serves them. So keeping it balanced is a challenge. And I think the two-party system has a tendency to take issues and to emotionally charge them so that objectivity in finding solutions isn't available. Linda and I, my friend Linda, when we were 7 years old, had a grand time balancing on that seesaw. But we did discover that when my sister got on next to me and Linda went way up in the air, my sister could play a dirty trick on us by jumping off, and Linda, cute little Linda, would go flying. And so it's very easy. This bipolar, it is quite honestly a bipolar system. And we can very easily say, wear a hat after so many years and say, do not blame me, I'm not a Republican, do not blame me, I'm not a Democrat. And that's because we don't buy in and we don't accept responsibility for the decisions we made while we were in office. And I thank Senator Scott, who I know has been here a long time, and several of the others of you who have weathered the storms of sticking with it beyond that limited term.
Just want to keep your comments focused on perhaps which of these.
Oh, I'm sorry,
Yep.
I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah, no, not a problem.
Okay,
We're going just fine. I'm
what am
just
I doing
directing
that's
you at
wrong?
which one of those kind of ideas do we want to push and why?
I want to push ranked choice voting. And if you were to go to the playground, you would see, I do that with and I'm making an analogy, and I'm sorry, I might be going too far with the analogy. But if you go to the playground, very few playgrounds anymore have a seesaw because of the fact that it is dangerous. And there are now, parts, playground things where the kids have to work together and use their weight together to make the merry-go-round go around. And I think that's kind of what our electoral process needs to do, is to open it up so that there's involvement and buy-in by all members of our population and our citizenry. And I think that stops the emotionally charged, quite honestly, hate talk, and it brings a sense of cooperation and understanding of different parts of an issue. And we don't see things as black and white. We look for the intricate solutions that are creative and beyond this either or solution. And I won't go on and on about money in politics, but I do see that ranked choice voting is a way of engaging more citizens, and it opens up that ability to have that, Mrs. Zenzi's promise that their vote does count. We can have that in our, that Girl Scout promise. It can be a real promise for our citizens in Wyoming. Questions?
Any questions? Okay, well, since we brought up, seeing no questions, thank you much
All
again.
right.
Well, if there's another bill you want to testify on, it's going to be an exciting afternoon. Let's talk about ranked choice voting then. And actually, we do have, is it Jeremy, I believe, from ranked choice voting with us virtually. Mr. Gruber, if you would like to, actually, no, ranked choice voting, Matt. I'm looking through all of my screen. Mr. Germer, there you are, I see you. The floor is yours if you can hear me, Mr. Germer.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Members of the committee, my name is Matthew Germer. I am a researcher at the R Street Institute. We are a think tank focused on free markets and limited government across a variety of policy areas, which includes elections, which is what I focus on. I'm here today to follow up on testimony that I provided to you a few months ago about instant runoff elections that use ranked choice voting, and also to answer any questions that you may have. For some very quick background, I believe most of you are familiar with instant runoff elections, but for those watching at home who maybe aren't, ranked choice voting is an instant runoff elections conducts immediate and instant runoff elections. Voters rank the candidates, and a candidate, if they have a majority of the first place votes, the election's over, they're the winner. If not, the candidate receiving the least number of votes is eliminated. Their votes are redistributed to their next choice, and the process continues until one candidate has a majority. This kind of process ensures that the winning candidate has broad support among voters, that voters can show support for more than one candidate on the ballot, which gives them this power to not worry about what's known as the spoiler effect, which is that feeling of throwing away your vote if you like someone who isn't one of the top candidates. And all of this can be done while showing respect for taxpayers by avoiding additional runoff elections. Instant runoffs are used in cities and states across the country, from Maine to Alaska, including just next door to Wyoming and Utah. They've been trying instant runoff elections in a pilot program with their local elections. And what we've seen is that a strong majority of Utah voters liked the experience of ranking candidates in their local elections. I believe nearly 2/3 of voters were extremely supportive of this. And an overwhelming majority, around 80 to 20%, 80% of voters compared to 20, found ranked choice voting to be very easy. And the 20% that argued that it perhaps wasn't easy, even then largely said it wasn't hard, just that it was different. So with that, I'll thank you for your time on the topic. I'm happy to answer any questions the committee may have. I spend a fair amount of my time researching this topic, so I'll do my best to answer any questions you have, including how ideas like ranked choice voting might work alongside other kinds of reform ideas like open primaries, which is the system that we see in Alaska, where they combine those two ideas together.
And Mr. Germer, is Alaska the only state at a statewide level? Is Alaska and Maine who both use ranked choice voting, and everything else is municipal or county? Is that correct right now?
That's correct. In Maine, they use ranked choice voting both in the primaries and in the general election. In Alaska, they have a system with open primaries, all candidates appearing on the primary ballot, and the top 4 candidates then move on to the general election. And the general election is conducted using ranked choice voting, with the ultimate ranked choice instant runoff winner winning that election.
Questions, committee? Representative Roscoe, floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would just like to know maybe how ranked choice would affect independent candidates. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
That's a great question, and I'll answer this. I am a lawyer, so I apologize for the lawyerly response, and the classic answer for lawyers is it depends. But it does depend on how the primary system works and whether there are changes to the primary system as well. If ranked choice voting is being used in a system with kind of traditional closed primaries, each of the parties picking their partisan candidate to move forward to the general, then you would still see independent candidates showing up on the final ballot, assuming they were allowed under the existing system, at which point voters could feel more encouraged to vote for a third-party candidate, because they would know that perhaps if they live in a district that's heavily partisan in one direction, they can pick that third-party candidate perhaps as their first choice, and then one of the major party candidates as a second choice, knowing that no matter what the final result is, they'll have their chance to contribute to the kind of top 2 people that end up being in the election. If the system works more like Alaska, where you've got an open primary system with all candidates appearing on the primary ballot, Alaska has a system where the top 4 move on to the general election, and this creates space for third parties to make their way to the general election, although there would be no guarantee of making your way there. It is possible that all 4 of the candidates come from the major parties. If the third party is popular enough in that district to at least make the top 4, or there are other states looking at ideas like top 5, then that allows for substantial space on the general election ballot for independent or third party candidates.
Okay. Other questions, committee? Not seeing any right now. Maybe don't go too far though, just in case if we have another one pop up on us.
Great.
So while we're still on the aspect of ranked choice voting, so that's more of a voting system than necessarily a change on our laws. Anyone else here want to talk about ranked choice in the audience? Ms. Corfon or Mr. Schoen, do you want up first, or do you want to go at the end? Come on down, Mr. Schoen. You might have to go more than once is my only concern, depending on how the testimony goes. But welcome back, State Elections Director. Floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Kai Schoen, State Election Director in our Secretary of State's office. I'll keep my remarks pretty short and of course be ready for any questions. Ranked choice, I know our office has spoken on this in years past. The biggest hurdle to ranked choice voting is simply that we don't have a federally certified system that has ranked choice voting. So Election Systems and Software, who is our voting system vendor, they have a third-party tool that's compatible, but it is not a federally certified version, and we require that in order to be used in Wyoming. I will mention that that is by rule, and maybe a suggestion to consider codifying that, just throwing that out there. And so in addition to that component, to actually put that into place, the initial year would cost roughly $864,000 for the initial implementation of that. And then each subsequent year, it can be up to $10,000 per county per election. So if it's only considered in the primary election, it'd be, additional $230,000 an election year. But of course, if you add the general, then that's twice that amount. And again, the component that was developed for ES&S, a third party, it was specific for Maine. And Maine does not require federal certification. And so I think that is why that played out the way it did.
I guess let me ask a couple of questions. Why do we require federal certification and have the federal government bless us? Do we need that for some legitimate reason? Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Excellent question. So the federal certification process that's done by the Election Assistance Commission, they were created in 2002 under HAVA, if you remember the Help America Vote Act. And so they were tasked with developing voluntary voting system guidelines to which voting systems would be tested to. And so they partnered with the National Institute of Standards and Technology to get these requirements for these systems to adhere to, as well as develop those test assertions. And so many states, the large majority, really rely heavily on the federal certification process because it's a huge undertaking, and only a few states, even have the capacity to have their own state certification process because it's costly. It requires a lot of certain, staff with certain special skills and knowledge. And so it's really been a service to states to have that federal certification process, and I think we'd be remiss to remove ourselves from it.
So would I be correct in assuming there would be no good reason for us to, if we went to ranked choice voting, to only have it in the primary and not the general? Can we set up our systems a certain way that you could go back and forth? Or if we're going to do it, it would be with the primary and the general election would be most cost effective if we were to do it.
Mr. Chairman, excellent question, and I'm glad you listened to what I had said just prior, because to actually make those changes, I may have spoke out of turn. If we're going to make the changes, it's going to focus on one method of voting, which would be ranked choice. If the wish of the legislature is not to move that direction, then it would have to stay as it is right now. So we couldn't go back and forth, and I do apologize for that.
So then perhaps the only other interesting question, because one of the other options on the table is a runoff primary. If we get 15 right now Republicans on the ballot, to have a different system to make sure somebody gets 50%. And we talked about how that would be an additional election and move around the calendar. I guess I'm looking for what's the cost benefit of both. Having a whole nother election potential process and a runoff situation versus a ranked choice. At least in my mind, a ranked choice would say you probably wouldn't need another election. You would just have a better feel for tallying candidates. What's cheaper and easier to implement if we were to go in one of those two options?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Easier to implement first, it would be the system we have right now and incorporating a runoff. However, that would be more costly, as we've heard testimony, from the clerks in the past, and they may also provide further testimony today that you're looking at roughly $1 million to put on another statewide election, which would likely be the case for a runoff here in Wyoming. We see that quite a bit in statewide offices. And so ranked choice voting, as I mentioned, would cost roughly $864,000 out of the gates, and then just $10,000 per election. So that is a lower cost, but more difficult to implement. And of course, the education component and all of that is involved too.
And let me make sure I understand, 10,000 per county or 10,000 statewide?
Mr. Chairman, 10,000 per county per election.
Then I guess I'll ask somebody else later the question, would it be advisable or completely inadvisable to allow a county clerk and a county, based on their commissioners, to do ranked choice as a county level? If we gave it to be an option and county clerks and the county commissioners could decide in their counties to go ranked choice or not ranked choice, would that have any concerns or problems in the statewide? I'm sure it'd be interesting, but any problems allowing each county to go their own way with voting equipment, et cetera?
Mr. Chairman, that is an excellent question that I have not actually considered. I do know that the changes that ranked choice voting implies on our voter registration system is a statewide system. So the complexity of having both of those types of primaries coexist, I don't know if that is possible. I don't have the information really to answer that.
Mr. Chairman,
Senator Case.
just while you're thinking about that, I mean, we could have a system where we experimented with ranked choice voting for municipal and county elections. And we did it within the context of our existing election. And we used, people go to the polls, they use the same machines. My question is, if just say we did it for municipal, the federal election requirements, the certification you mentioned, would that be upset by allowing it for municipal elections? In other words, we kind of overlay or experiment with ranked choice for a subset of our elections, realizing they're on the same machines when people go to the polls. What do you speculate about that, and could we look into that?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Case, the federal certification process is for the equipment that's used throughout the state. And so whether there's federal offices or not, the equipment that's used has to be through that federal certification process. You bring up a good point with municipalities because the partisan issue that we have with our voter registration, yeah, because that is a nonpartisan, offices. So that's interesting, but as far as the voting equipment, it would still have to get funneled through the rules process.
Thank you.
Other questions, committee, for the elections director? I don't know, have we talked to our colleagues in Utah about how they do it with their municipal elections versus statewide? We haven't had any conversations, but we could.
No, Mr. Chairman, but yes, we could have those conversations.
Okay. All right. Thank you much. Let's go to Mr. Chestick online and then whoever wants to testify next in the audience. We're still kind of on the ranked choice idea. Mr. Chestick, if you can hear me, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I can't hear you. Let me start my video. Here we go. Okay, so very briefly, I am a big fan of ranked choice voting. I think I testified previously that the Democratic Party did it on an internal basis for choosing its 2020 delegates to the National Convention. I thought it worked very well. The point I want to make, though, I'll be very brief. One of the advantages of it is the effect that it can and usually does have on political discourse. I think we're all aware that the level of discourse in politics has degenerated over the past few years. It's gotten much more personal, much more vicious, a lot more of attacks, and it's not good for political conversations at all. One thing that ranked choice voting does is it incentivizes people to mitigate and tone down the rhetoric. So maybe I'm not going to be your first choice, but please make me your second choice. So in order to try and get support for second or third choices, I don't want to be attacking number one choice as much as I might otherwise. So I think it does have a very significant mitigating effect on the tone of the political conversation, and that's a good thing. And I think that's another good reason why we should very seriously consider going to ranked choice voting. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Questions for Mr. Chestick? Not seeing it at this time. Thank you, Ken.
Thank you.
Any other testimony on ranked choice voting as an option? Ms. Corfanta. Welcome.
Okay. Thank you. I'm presenting for the same reason I spoke on the last bill. My only reason to be here is to improve our country and our state. And I want to see our young people participate more in elections. And I want to see less vitriol and division in our politics. Last week, I served as was it last week? An election judge. It seems so long ago, doesn't it? And a number of people came in to register for the first time. By the way, very few of them were young voters, which is a great concern to me. More than half of the people were surprised that they had to declare a party affiliation. A few wanted to be independents, but when they saw there was no one for whom they could vote, they chose Republican. Those who live in Sheridan County and not in the city and are not Republican have no choices for whom to vote. All the county commissioners and the sheriffs and the county coroner's offices were just on the Republican ballot, and the decision was being made in the primary. In other states, such as Montana, and I don't think they have the greatest election system, but the citizens don't have to register as Republican, Libertarian, Democrat, Constitutional, whatever. Here in Wyoming, some Republicans are creating a new false division among us citizens by claiming that Democrats and rhinos are voting in their elections, and they want to make it harder for citizens to switch party. First off, don't the elections belong to all of us? Don't our taxes pay for the elections? They're not paid by one party. Ranked choice voting, otherwise known as instant runoff, along with what I've heard before, I loved what Jackie McMahon talked about, the creative problem solving, coming up with new ideas. I love that. It would also solve the problem that I understand that in a crowded GOP primary, a winner can get elected with less than a majority of a vote. I understand that concern. It would solve the problem of so many who do not identify with a party that are feeling disenfranchised, especially young people. My own children, my own young adult children, I make them vote, but they don't think their vote makes a difference. I mean, I really do make them vote, but they want to be totally disengaged from any political activity. I think that's sad for our country. Another thing that I think instant runoff voting would do would be increase our choices, as well as give third-party candidates more of a chance, which could provide more ideas and solutions. And my favorite reason, as I think Mr. Chestic alluded to, it would decrease divisive politics, as a candidate would have to appeal to a broader swath of the electorate, not just their partisan loyalists. I think I'll make it short because I know you have a long 2 days. I really appreciate your time and all of your work trying to work for the greater good of Wyoming citizens.
Questions for Mr. Corfanta? Not seeing you right now. Anyone else in ranked choice? Ma'am. Welcome back. And they left the microphone on for you.
It's on. I'm Barbara Chase from Sheridan, and I will make mine really brief. First, I want to say that thank you for hearing me. And I was also I'm election judge, and I help handle and count the absentee ballots. And I'm always impressed at the diligence and the pride our election people take in the campaign and the elections. And I agree that the name of the free and fair election bill should probably be changed to maybe something along the lines of election transparency bill, something like that. But my main emphasis and desire to see ranked choice voting, open primary, instant runoff bill is because of it would incentivize candidates to find common ground with the other candidates rather than spending their time on negative campaigning, which I think is a big thing that's happening these days. I think that's the main reason I think it's important. And I also think it's much, I'll even speak my piece about runoff elections at the same time. Primarily, I think that runoff elections are expensive. You get this, basically the timing based on what's in our Constitution, now I understand is difficult. And you would get essentially the same type of result from a runoff election without the $1 million price tag involved with it. So anyway, I'm just going to leave it at that, and thank you very much for considering my opinion. So I urge yes on the first two bills and no on the runoff elections. Thank you very much.
You're going to get a question here.
Any
Senator
questions?
Case.
Not really, ma'am. I was just trying to, I think you said, if I heard your words right, you said you'd get the same results from a runoff election that you would, and I think you meant to say ranked choice when you said that word, but
I meant ranked choice and
Yeah, okay.
runoff.
thank you. Maybe I
Okay.
heard it wrong, but
Okay,
thank you.
I may have misspoken too.
All right, thank you. Anyone
Thanks
else
very
on
much.
ranked choice? Not seeing any, and we're just kind of going to have a discussion among the committee if any of these kind of ideas are going forward after we hear from them all.
Katie's got somebody online.
Somebody name, let's let Mr. Link and Mr. Miller, if they want to talk about ranked choice, we'll bring them both in and
If you don't let Brent Moline, you'll never get paid.
Mr. Link, are you here to talk about ranked choice voting?
Terrible.
Matt? All right. Or Mr. Miller, do you want to talk about ranked choice voting?
I'm sorry, can people hear me?
Yep, go ahead, Mr. Link, floor is yours.
Okay, great. Just 1 second, my computer's a little slow here. Yeah, so I'm Matthew Link from the Wyoming League of Women Voters voting methods team. Let me turn my video on here. So in the past few years, the League of Women Voters has taken an interest in this topic and has been organizing educational presentations both around the state physically and conducted virtually. Although the League currently doesn't have an official position that ventures beyond calling for any particular alternative voting method, here's my personal thoughts on this bill, speaking as someone who's done a very great deal of study on this topic. And I want to apologize ahead of time. I only found out about this meeting and the bill itself yesterday, and my notes are a little disorganized here. So the first thing I'd like to focus on here is the terminology used for this bill. The bill itself refers to the phrase ranked choice voting, which is a somewhat ambiguous term that, as it's used, defines two different voting methods that can produce considerably different election results. And in fact, there's many kinds of voting methods that involve ranking, and some of them are better than others. So my first plea for this bill, if it were to be pushed forward, is to use a more precise descriptor. Use the phrase instant runoff voting for clarity. We're talking about the single winner variant of ranked choice voting. Please call it instant runoff voting. And then I haven't had a lot of time to read this bill, but a couple things I noticed as I was going through it. I think there's a few points of other ambiguity that might be strengthened a bit. The first is, I think the bill could do a better job emphasizing that the weakest candidates with an instant runoff vote winner selection process, the weakest candidates are not simply knocked out when moving between rounds. It's the fact that what happens is the voters' preference rankings on their ballots are pushed forward by the knockout and redistributed among the remaining candidates. And I think wording this a bit more clearly will help other legislators consider voting in favor of it. And then second off, what constitutes a spoil ballot could maybe be clarified a little bit better. So it's the question of, are voters forced to rank all the candidates in their race? Are they forced to rank only a certain minimum number of candidates? Will their ballot still be counted if they only rank one candidate and ignore all the rest? So I can find where this is described in the bill, but only because of my familiarity with the subject. So I think perhaps a section that more clearly defines what constitutes a valid vote cast could help on this bill. Okay, and then I'd like to focus on this topic that a number of people have brought up, and I think was a major impetus for both this bill and the bills involving runoff elections, which is this idea of attempting to seek a majority in an election. The thing about majorities is any majority obtained either through a real runoff election or through a simulated runoff election with instant runoff voting is always in some sense an artificial majority, because you have to constrain the voters' input in order to obtain it. Only with a winner-take-all plurality voting method, which we use currently, only that voting method can establish a real, true majority when voters are allowed all options. And even then, that majority can only happen when a candidate has overwhelming support enough to obtain it, or when there's only 2 candidates on the ballot. So my argument would be, rather than prioritizing the construction of a majority in elections, we could consider instead attempting to minimize the distance between election winners and the mass of voters. In other words, we could, in elections, attempt to select candidates that are closest to the sum of voter preferences. In voting method science, this is known as maximizing so-called utility. You can think of candidates that win, you can think of utility maximizing candidates as consensus candidates in an election. They're closest to everyone who has voted. For example, the class of utility maximizing voting methods known as cardinal or rating-based voting methods are not concerned at all with measuring whether a majority has been achieved. Yet, they tend to produce better results in elections with less tactical voting than instant runoff voting or holding separate runoff elections. So for example, these are voting methods like approval voting, score voting, star voting, et cetera. And they have some other appealing properties, including the fact that the ballot and counting process is simpler with these methods, and they're much less prone to errors from the voter and during the tabulation procedure for the method. And then another thing I'd like to tackle, if I have the time.
You've got a minute or two, yep, go ahead.
Yeah, is this concept of breaking down two-party rule with an alternative voting method. It's very important that we have realistic expectations when we're adopting alternative voting methods. And this idea of breaking down a two-party system is for some people really important. And unfortunately, with instant runoff voting, the evidence in real world use just isn't there that it actually breaks down two-party domination. IRV is instant runoff voting is actually not as new as people probably think. It's been around for 100 years, used in various governments and parts of the world. And in all the governments that have used it, all the municipalities, the local elections that have used it, have largely retained two-party domination. Now, there's other alternative voting methods that may have a better chance of defeating that, but it's important we don't get our hopes up for that one. And I think the final point I want to tackle here is this idea that instant runoff voting defeats the spoiler effect in elections. So another way to describe the spoiler effect is this concept of vote splitting, where when you have when you have more than two candidates in an election, one candidate can pull votes from another one. Well, instant runoff voting still has that, actually. And the thing is, it doesn't really rear its head until you get to a close three-way race, because that's when tactical voting starts to become really important and big in instant runoff voting elections again. And that is actually one of the major reasons that instant runoff voting has largely failed to overcome two-party domination in elections, because third parties can compete until they become competitive, in which case people go for the two safe options again. So I think those are all the points I wanted to make. I can answer any questions if anyone has them.
Right, questions for Mr. Link? And I just want to double check, you're speaking on behalf of the League of Women Voters and?
Yes, okay. But I'm not speaking in favor. When it comes to supporting any particular voting method, those are all my own words.
Okay, questions for Mr. Link? Representative Ayer, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Link, I'd like to, in your experience, do you see the outcome of a instant runoff election being changed very often from the candidate who received a plurality? In other words, the ultimate winner, is it ever changed? Or how often is it changed from the person who received the most votes in the initial count?
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So that's a difficult question to answer because when people vote in a plurality election versus an instant runoff voting, they're fundamentally providing different sorts of information. So it's hard to answer that question on a case-by-case basis, but we can sort of answer it in aggregates through simulation and through studying lots of different elections at a time. And we do see that instant runoff voting can provide a different winner in elections than plurality voting, but it's perhaps not as much as people would like it to. There's other voting methods that tend to do it more frequently because they can disincentivize tactical voting more strongly than instant runoff voting.
Further questions? Not any. Thank you much, Mr. Link, for being here. Anyone else on ranked choice? Okay, let's move on to open primaries. Mr. Gruber, I know you're on the line. Jeremy, you have the floor. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, for the opportunity to speak with you. My name is Jeremy Gruber. I'm the SVP of Open Primaries. We're a national nonpartisan organization that conducts research and educates the public about primary election systems, and we work with citizens, nonprofits, and legislators all across the country and serve as a resource for these types of discussions we're having today. I don't need to tell anyone there that Wyoming voters are smart and they want a meaningful experience at the polls. And when they don't find it, because elections are increasingly uncompetitive and candidate choice is increasingly limited, they stop participating. And that's not an experience that's limited to Wyoming. Uncompetitive elections and low voter turnout are endemic in states all around the country. And that's why at least a third of all states in the country are now actively studying how to improve their primary elections. And many of them are considering nonpartisan open primaries, which is what I'd like to tell you a little bit more detail about today. The nonpartisan open primary operates very differently from the partisan primaries that Wyoming and a number of states currently employ. There's no longer a Republican or Democratic Party primary. There is simply one public primary. All the candidates are on the same ballot. All the voters vote, and the top vote getters move on to the general election. It's a simple, straightforward, and fully transparent process. And it's a process that was first introduced at the state level over 80 years ago by then Nebraska Republican Senator George Norris, one of the great champions of American democracy during the last century. And it was part of Norris's dream for effective government because nonpartisan primaries encapsulate the very basic conservative principles of fairness and competition. We're witnessing a 30-year decline in general election competitiveness in Wyoming and across the country as a whole. In most races, it's the primary, not the general election, that determines who ends up being the winning candidate. Letting every voter vote in a competitive primary election creates better and more accountable representatives who are more responsive to their constituents, not just the special interests, in order to get elected. That just makes for more productive government. And quite frankly, it's also just plain fair. As one of the previous folks who testified mentioned, primary elections are taxpayer funded. Every Wyoming citizen pays for the primaries, which cost the state over $1 million to administer every election year. To not give every voter full access to these primaries at arm's length is nothing less than taxation without representation, one of the founding principles of our republic. And it's because nonpartisan primaries reflect core conservative principles that it has been conservative champions that have led this reform in every state that has adopted it. From Senator Norris, who I mentioned in Nebraska, to the Grange in Washington State, to former Governor Schwarzenegger in California. And I'm pleased to see that tradition is now being carried forward in Wyoming today. Everyone in this room is already familiar with nonpartisan primaries. They're the standard model of election for 90% of municipal elections in the United States, including Wyoming. Everyone listening to my words has voted in a nonpartisan primary at some point. And it's no coincidence that when you talk to most people about what level of government they're most satisfied with, the response is almost always their local representatives, because when you have a system that allows you to choose the best candidate first, everyone benefits, both politicians and voters alike. And that's why I encourage this committee to seriously consider exploring a move to nonpartisan open primaries. I'm happy to support that conversation and be a resource and answer any questions you have today. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions for Jeremy? I'm not seeing a single question for you, Mr. Gruber, so hang tight and we'll keep talking about open primaries. Anyone in the room want to talk about open primaries? Yeah, Ms. Lau, come on down.
Good morning, Chairman and esteemed committee members. My name is Jen Lowe. I'm Executive Director at the Equality State Policy Center. ESPC is a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization that advocates for fair elections, transparent government, and thriving communities. First, I would like to thank you for your service to the great state of Wyoming. I know this is often a thankless job, and just know that your work is appreciated and recognized. Two, I'd like to thank you for bringing up the issue of elections and how we can improve those elections for the folks here in the state of Wyoming. Third, I'd like to thank the clerks and the election workers who volunteered their time last week to host a record-breaking primary election, and the clerks for hosting a election that was secure and correct. Our primary last week was record-breaking. More people showed up to vote in that election than any other previous primary election in history in Wyoming. 94% of people that voted last Tuesday voted on the Republican ticket. That is essentially an open primary for all intents and purposes. And more or less, voters had their voice heard. There are two major issues that I'm consistently listening to as being cited as detrimental to Wyoming's election system. One is crossover voting, and the other is the plurality versus majority winner. So as most of you know, crossover voting occurs when someone registered as a partisan party switches that partisan party to vote in a different party for the primary and then switches back. Wyoming statute currently allows that. As we've seen in previous legislative sessions, there have been bills that have attempted to end crossover voting and have not so far been successful. As far as the plurality versus majority goes, we've heard other speakers today talk about the benefits of plurality versus majority. So I'd like to start with ranked choice voting. Ranked choice voting does address the plurality versus majority issue. With each consecutive vote, as one person drops off of ranked choice voting, it brings the winner closer to a majority. Although it seems complicated, we can look to the south at Utah, where ranked choice voting is used at the local level and where we've heard voters seem to be quite happy with the results and with the process itself. We hear a lot about runoff elections, and last legislative session, we actually saw a bill. Well, technically two bills, right? Because there's the one that would address the statute and one that would address the constitutional amendment. We also know that it's expensive, you know, per the Secretary of State's office, $1 million per election. And also that decreases participation. With each consecutive election, fewer and fewer people participate. So with a runoff election, it costs more, fewer people participate. There's got to be a better way to take care of this. Brings me to open primaries. Like I said, with 94% of people voting on the same ballot last Tuesday, we essentially had an open primary here in Wyoming. Open primaries almost also eliminate the need for crossover voting bill. There's no need to switch parties when there's no parties involved. The other wonderful thing about open primaries is it allows taxpayers, those who are funding these elections, to fully participate, as we've heard the previous speaker mention. It also encourages candidates to communicate to a greater number of voters rather than to the extremes of either partisan party. Now, with an open primary, you get to the general. There's a couple different ways you can address the general election. You can do an open primary with top two. So the top two winners of that open primary would compete in the general election. In a state like Wyoming, there's a good chance that those two are going to be from the same partisan party. But that eliminates the need for a runoff because one will have a majority, the other will not. And it also eliminates the need, plurality majority, which I just mentioned. There are other options to look at, and one that I would like you to consider would be a open primary with a top four. So there are four that would come out of the primary, and those would be decided through ranked choice voting. Again, I know that we heard from Mr. Schoen that ranked choice voting is difficult to take on at this point. However, still less expensive than a runoff bill, still less expensive than a runoff election. At $100,000, or I'm sorry, $860,000 to initiate, and then $10,000, so up to $23,000 per election cycle. Still less expensive than a runoff election. The top four also would allow for other parties, independent parties, and third parties to participate potentially in the general election. So again, I appreciate you taking this up today. We can always find ways to improve the elections here in the state of Wyoming. I am grateful for your expertise, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have at this point.
Questions from Ms. Lowe? Senator Scott. And
Mr. Chairman. Get it. Somehow I don't have the touch. No, I can't get these things to work. Right. Anyhow, I have troubles with the proposals that are before us right now. I get concerned with the open primaries. Seems to me the experience in other states has been that too often the minority party is then shut out of the general election. And I don't think that is a good idea. I think people need to have that kind of choice. Second, the ranked choice voting I found just intriguing and tempting, frankly, Mr. Chairman. But when I've looked at the experience elsewhere, it doesn't seem to work very well because people have difficulty understanding it. And you have a number of people who don't participate in the ranking system or don't understand it. So currently I'm thinking that that's the old English expression, as too clever by a half, applies to ranked choice voting. And so I'm looking for something else. Runoffs don't work because they put the timing back so far because of the federal requirements trying to get overseas, particularly military service people, the ability to participate, which is a rational thing the feds have done, but it means you can't have a runoff a week or two after the primary. So it is no longer feasible. What I'm wondering and would like your reaction to is right now where a political party has a vacancy, we do not allow that to be filled after the primary. The party can replace a candidate who dies, doesn't have to, but can. Or a candidate who withdraws, but where they have just plain a vacancy, we don't allow that. What would happen if by some date certain, say the second Monday in September, which would always be more than 45 days away from the election? And the 45 days is significant because I think that's the federal deadline, is it not? You gave a party with a vacancy. Either wouldn't make any difference whether it's a major party like the Republicans or the Democrats, or a minor party such as the Libertarians. I think you all qualify as a minor party these days, do you not? I forget, don't know, may have the terminology.
We do, actually. That's why I'm sitting here. Thank you.
Yeah, okay. So if you gave all the parties the ability to fill their vacancies after the primary, so if there was a contentious result at the primary, they thought, gee, maybe we've got an opportunity, they could produce a candidate. And I don't know what the rules are on independent candidates. Maybe we could make that a bit easier to get one of those so that we had more contest in the general election. Would that be a solution that would work for us? And Mr. Chairman, I'm really thinking aloud and wanting to get the witness and maybe other witnesses to react to those thoughts.
Ms. Lowe, reactions, thoughts?
Okay, I'm not sure if I turned this on or off. Okay, looks like we're green for now. So I think what I'm hearing is you're asking if in the primary, let's say, we're going to a open primary type election, and then in the general, a top four? And no. So if the top, I'm sorry, I don't think I understand the question.
Mr. Chairman, my idea is that right now we don't have general election candidates for a number of offices.
Okay.
Because nobody filed in a particular party.
Okay.
So they didn't produce, and they didn't get 25 write-in votes in a primary, which is the current law. And say, mostly it would be the Democratic Party, but in places it could be it's the Republican Party. There's no opposing candidate to whoever came out of the primary in the general election. And you have a contentious primary, something goes wrong, there's an opportunity there. Why not let the political party that doesn't have a candidate, whichever ones there are, by give them by caucus, by the party's relevant central committee, just plain filling the vacancy. Let the party that doesn't have a candidate fill that vacancy. And so the general election then has a contest and seek to deal with the problems of that way. And that would be open to not only the major parties, but to people like the Libertarian Party and any other minor parties we happen to have. And it's not as elegant intellectually as some of the other solutions, but I think it, Mr. Chairman, might be a more practical way to get more general election contests that are real.
Ms. Lowe, if you have thoughts.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Scott, then why have a primary at all? If we're going to allow the partisan parties to select the candidate that's going to be on the ballot, why have voters come out for a primary election at all? If we want the partisan parties to select who is going to be represented in the general election.
It's an interesting discussion, but we're still kind of an open primary concepts. Senator Case, you want to jump in?
Mr. Chairman, I don't think Senator Scott was saying this would be only in the case where the primary didn't have anybody.
Right.
Yeah.
But I guess, I'm sorry, Chairman, Senator Case, then what would be the incentive to run on the primary ticket? And why would we host a primary and then allow a partisan party to also put somebody on the general ballot? And would that be for any?
Senator Scott?
Mr. Chairman, it would only apply where nobody came out of the primary, where there wasn't a candidate in the primary. If somebody knew at the filing deadline they wanted to run, they would file in the primary, and that would preclude the party from selecting somebody else because you'd get somebody out of the primary. So most of the time, the contest would be in the primary. But right now, we have a situation, for instance, in several of the statewide offices where would be just one name on the ballot. And allowing the, in this case, the Libertarian and the Democratic parties to select candidates for those offices where they don't have one now, and allowing that to be done by the party organization up until some date certain in September would fix that problem potentially.
Certainly another option. I'm not, if that's where the committee wants to go. Senator Case?
Mr. Chairman, I think Senator Scott's question is valid, and it's kind of like, it would create more interest. And parties, like, for example, the majority party, there'd still be many people that would file for election for that contest, so they wouldn't necessarily have that option, because the decision to file is an individual decision, it's not a party decision. But it is interesting. I've got more questions from Ms. Lowe about her other suggestions, if it's appropriate.
Sure. She's still the witness, so ask any question you want.
Ms. Lowe, intrigued, you had an open primary with 4 people going forward, and then would the general be, so it'd be the top 4, then would you resolve that in the general with ranked choice voting? And so, and I believe that you're nodding yes, so I get that. There was a previous gentleman that said, wasn't so keen on ranked choice voting, saying it didn't really produce the clear majority because it's kind of an artificial majority because it's a majority of the eliminated candidates. But your proposal seems to solve some of that a little bit.
Wouldn't you agree?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Case and Senator Scott. First, Senator Scott, I'd like to say that is a thoughtful idea that I had not considered before, so I appreciate that. Thank you. Senator Case, so Alaska has just adopted an open primary with a top 4 ranked choice voting system. And last Tuesday, the same day that we had our primary election, Alaska held theirs. So we're still waiting to hear what the results from that election are. But my understanding is when it comes to ranked choice voting, 9 out of 10 times the original winner will also end up being the final winner. There's usually not a huge bunch of discretion between the initial count and the final count, is my understanding. With the top 4, it allows greater participation of, I believe, third party or minor party candidates to participate in the general.
Then how do we fit independent candidates into that? I think that question's come up earlier too. So independents are nominated by petition. So they would go into the ranked choice mix. So would that be a 5th, a 6th, a 7th on top of the 4 from the primary? Is that the way that would work?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Case, I do not believe so. I believe the top 4 vote getters from the primary election would go into the ranked choice general.
But
Wouldn't have any, you wouldn't be able to file an independent, I would
It
think.
wouldn't guarantee that a minor party or independent candidate is in those top 4, but it would give voters a greater selection, and it would give minor party and third party candidates a greater opportunity to participate in the general.
let me be sure I understand. So you're suggesting that we don't select independent candidates by petition. They would just put their name on a ballot and say, I'm an independent, and they would go into the open primary. That's what you're saying? I didn't understand that point before, and I'm sorry.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Case, yes, that is what I am suggesting.
And then would all other minor parties do the same thing?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Case, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Senator Boner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Now, getting back to ranked choice, you mentioned several times Utah has successfully implemented some form of it in that they allow the option for local municipalities. And I think that I share a lot of the same views as my colleague from Base Creek, that it could be a good system, but it's going to take some getting used to from folks. So just a little bit, if you have any insight into the way Utah has done it. I know there's been a lot to talk about what happened in New York or what's happening in Alaska right now. I think the jury's still out when the results haven't quite been tabulated for another week or so up there. But Utah, obviously, very similar state. If you could just share any details as far as your understanding of how Utah's gone about doing it with providing basically a local option. If a municipal election wants to utilize it, they can go ahead, but it's certainly not required.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Boner, thank you for that question. My understanding is that the polling shows that Utah voters really appreciate ranked choice voting at the local level for these nonpartisan races and have not found it confusing, although that is a message that has been, I think, sort of proliferated with ranked choice voting, is that voters don't find it very confusing, right? Who do you pick first? Who do you pick second? Who do you pick third? Who do you pick fourth, et cetera? And then, you can sort of visualize how it works, right? You do one count, there's not a majority, that bottom person gets knocked off. Whoever voted for that bottom person at the top, second vote gets counted until the winner has a majority. Again, we've not heard back from Alaska yet, so still kind of waiting to see how that race turns out. My understanding too is that the Democratic Party of Wyoming has used ranked choice voting in its elections. And they seem to be pleased with the results. So I think that the narrative that ranked choice voting is confusing is a false one. I think when you're thinking about it in theory, it probably seems a bit confusing, but so far in practice, it has shown to be easy to use and reliable.
Follow up?
Yeah, and just as we consider all these options, like these details would be really important. Who pays for it? Who decides the local, city council? Is it the county commissioners? How is that? All those details are really important, I think. And I'd like to learn more about the way Utah does it specifically if we're going to, move forward with this in any form or fashion. So just a general comment and question, as we consider that, those details are very important.
Okay, further questions from Ms. Lowe, and then I may go back to Mr. Gruber just to answer any of those, but go ahead, Jen.
Mr. Chairman and Senator Boner, thank you. I would be delighted to bring to your next meeting someone from Utah to talk about the experience there. I think as far as the county commissioner races go, those are still partisan races, so I don't think that is somewhere where, at least with local ranked choice voting, is something we would suggest. Rather, it would be up to the municipality or city if it is a form of election that they would like to try. And then I would imagine that the body who's responsible for paying for the election would also be responsible for paying for that.
Okay. Matt, did you have any follow-up response on the ranked choice part of that question? Go ahead.
Sure. Are you referring to me, Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Yes. So thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. I just wanted to chip in to provide a little bit of clarity I heard on a couple of the questions as they've come up so far. Most relatedly, the question around Utah and how things went there. As a pilot program, it was open to cities to adopt, I believe, 23 cities opted in to the ranked choice voting program. 3 of the cities, however, didn't have contested elections that required ranked choice voting. So ultimately, I believe about 20 cities tried it. And since it is nonpartisan elections, they were able to drop off primary elections entirely. And that saved a substantial amount of money in each of these cities by removing one of the elections. And I think in some cases they had kind of a no primary celebration day instead of holding the primary election on those days and build a little bit of civic pride by not having a primary that day. I guess just to answer one other question as it got brought up along the way about how this system would work more mechanically around third parties and nonpartisan candidates. As was previously testified to, yes, I believe everybody that is interested in running for office for that particular office signs up for the open primary, regardless of your partisan affiliation or lack of partisan affiliation. And at the time then, if you were to combine open primaries and ranked choice voting, that first list of candidates on the open primary ballot would be the entirety of the list of candidates. No additional people would get brought in for the general election if you were to use a top 4 or top 5 system like they have in Alaska, at which point, once you've identified those top 4 or top 5, regardless of party, you would then use ranked choice voting in the general election to conduct it. Finally, I want to note that as was brought up in other testimony that's been brought before the committee, there are other ways to use ranked choice voting. Ranked choice voting is kind of a blanket term for the time that you ask voters to rank their candidates. And then you could use other kind of counting systems to determine who wins. And that instant runoff voting is in fact the most popular way of doing it. As has been pointed out, perhaps just like everything in life, right? There are trade-offs, there are costs and benefits. Instant runoff voting isn't perfect. No voting system is. The benefit that it brings is not just that it helps to provide a healthier campaign system where folks are encouraged to run affirmative campaigns to say why they are the best candidate as opposed to negative campaigns, but also that it is one of the easier ones for voters to understand. There's a meaningful concern that changes in election systems could be confusing, and we don't want anyone to be disenfranchised as a result of a change. Fortunately, ranked choice voting, when it's done in practice, you hand someone a ballot and say, rank your favorite candidates. Folks know what to do. That's true both in the polling results, as we've seen in Utah, but also in my research in Maine. I went through their ranked choice voting elections and tried to find the number of times people showed evidence of confusion. How many times did they accidentally vote for too many people as their first choice candidate, et cetera? And what I learned is largely mistakes happen on ballots in current elections, the plurality winner take all style elections. They also happen on ranked choice voting elections. And that at the end of the day, people aren't really disenfranchised as a result of any kind of confusion. People seem to understand exactly how to handle ranked choice voting ballots once they get their hands on them. It can be a little complicated just sitting across a table trying to explain it to someone, but when they see it, when they try it, they know what to do.
All right, thank you, Mr. Grimmer. Any other questions from Ms. Lowe while I have her up? Okay, thanks, Jen, just so you get off the hot seat. And then Mr. Gruber, did you have another jump in on open primaries? I see
Yes,
your hands up.
a
Go ahead.
couple of quick points, Mr. Chairman. The question that was raised about whether a more limited form of open primary might be utilized when there is an uncontested primary election, and only in those types of situations, that version is actually in use currently in Florida, and it sounds good on paper, but unfortunately, it's highly receptive to partisan manipulation. And in Florida, they have a constant problem with folks using write-in candidates as a way of closing what would have otherwise been a more open system as a result of that. So I would warn against that more limited version. But more generally, I think the concern about uncontested elections is a very real and important one. In 2020, 60% of Wyoming's general elections were uncontested. That means in 6 out of 10 elections, when you went into the voting booth in November in Wyoming, there was only one person on the ballot. That's not good for anybody. That's not choice, and that's not meaningful voting. Uncontested elections almost go completely away with nonpartisan primaries. Every state that has utilized the nonpartisan primary has found competition skyrockets. There's more voter choice. There's more opportunity for both parties and for independent candidates because the gatekeepers move from the party insiders to the public at large. And so there's a more diversity of candidates, more opportunity for different types of candidates, both within the parties and outside the parties. And it's a much more robust and democratic conversation happening at the ballot box. So I do suggest, and I'm happy to provide more evidence of those types of value assessments.
All right, thank you very much. And then certainly there are other options that we could pursue. I know we talked about runoff primaries as well, certainly last year, and I know there are some people online who might want to talk about runoff primaries. I'm just waiting to see if there's any hands that go up from 3 of the 4 of the people that I believe would like to talk about why runoff primary may be the best way to go to solve our issue. Mr. Moline, go ahead. Floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Brett Moline, Wyoming Farm Bureau Federation. Assuming you can hear me okay?
Yep.
My organization likes the partisan system, and we would support the runoff election. That it's the simplest, the most direct, straightforward. One of the troubles back when we had several representatives of the legislature running from a county, we had people that were advocating for the bullet vote. So instead of voting for, like in Albany County, I believe there's 5, just vote for me. Just give me the vote. I wonder if we wouldn't have that with the ranked choice, instead of ranking the top 5 out of 7 or whatever. Talking to my counterparts over in other states that have the runoffs or have the ranked choices, the ranked choice can lead to some candidates just having just vote for me, don't vote for the other ones. That helps my chances. I realize the cost would be higher with a runoff, but I believe the first year would be covered by not having to change computer systems. If I heard it right, it costs about $1 million to do a runoff election. Well, with 800,000 at the state level to change the computer system, and then at $10,000 a county, that's 230,000. You're looking at right at $1 million there. I think we want to, my organization, my policy is to keep the partisan elections. And of all the choices, we lean towards the runoff election. One of the, I think, the most positive aspect, I realize we will have to change our constitution. One thing I love about that is it will go to the vote of the people. Do the people want it? We won't be listening to lobbyists taking one side or the other. Of course, I want my side to win, of course. But I think that's what I love about the choice of the runoff elections, that we would have to change our constitution. The people will have to vote on it. I've never been afraid of having the people of Wyoming vote on an issue. So that's for that, Mr. Chairman, I would sit for any questions.
Questions for Mr. Moline in the Farm Bureau? I'm not seeing any, Brent. Thanks for being here today and for waiting.
Thank you for the opportunity. I really appreciate it.
Yep. Mr. Steinmetz, you are up. Welcome to Corporations.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity to be here today and to visit with you. I think we've addressed this committee previously on this issue in the past, and I don't believe that our position has changed. Probably the biggest thing I would point out is you can see this nationally. We can see this in our state. The philosophy, the political philosophy between Democrats, Republicans, really even the minor parties is very evident. It's very obvious. In Wyoming, prior to this most recent election, we were nearly 70, if not over 70% Republican registration. And I think the biggest challenge you get into when you start talking about taking away a partisan primary is the fact that many of our voters, they trust that R behind a Republican's name when they're running. They trust that if they're voting for someone that says they're a Republican, that they represent the values and the beliefs that they believe in. So my biggest challenge, and I think what we've heard from Republicans all across the state, is that we want to keep our primary. We want Republicans voting for Republican nominees. We want Democrats voting for Democrat nominees. And we would have competitive elections if Democrats would have people run. I mean, that's the bottom line. And I don't know that we need to reinvent the wheel. I don't know that we need to go back and discuss any of the other issues. We've been talking about these for several years, but if we start talking about open primaries, we start talking about major changes to state statutes in terms of our political organization elections in the primary, like the precinct committee men, precinct committee women. That's our grassroots. And if we start taking that and going to an open primary, the grassroots becomes less involved. And I think that's very dangerous territory. So I'll just leave it at that. And thank you for letting me testify.
Oh, certainly. Thank you. Any questions, Mr. Simons? Not seeing any. Corey, thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Anyone else want to testify on runoff primaries or any other form of modification to our current primary system? Okay. Yep. Is there someone else online? Mr. Miller, let's go online to Brian, and then while he's talking, come on up, ma'am. Go ahead, Brian, you have the floor.
Can you hear me, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, go ahead.
Great. Mr. Chairman, it's Brian Miller. I'm up here in Sheridan County. I'm calling on my own behalf, actually, at this point. Thank you for allowing me to testify today. There are a few things, and this actually goes across multiple of the issues that you've covered here, but very directly when it comes to the runoffs. My question is this: why would we complicate the voting and election process for the people? It should be very simple. Vote, count, recount if necessary, runoff of less than 50%. The cost, it should not matter when we're looking at this. If we're talking And I find it hard to see that it costs $1 million to do an election, and we've provided other means in the past on how to keep that cost down. But elections are key to our overriding success as a nation. And so we should be willing to spend the money to do elections properly. And to as I roll into this next question, to resolve this question, why would we add more questions and increase the potential for errors and breed doubt amongst the electorate by trying to go through these complicated systems? When you're going through the rank choice, you're using algorithms, and you are actually eliminating the power of a single vote. Your vote becomes less and less each level you move down. So that makes no sense to me. Why would we want to go down that road? I do believe that supporting a runoff election is by far the quickest and best way to do it. I don't know if you've seen the reports in France. They still hand count every vote in France, and their elections are done in a single night. Yeah, they're not as big as the U.S., but Wyoming ain't near as big as France. We ought to be able to do that here as well. I did want to also note that Title 22 already allows third-party candidates to be on the general election ballot. So when people are complaining that there's just nobody to choose from, I find that amazing. Because, you know, at one point we had 9 U.S. House candidates, 5 gubernatorial candidates, 4 on the superintendent's list, and that's just within the GOP. If other parties are not putting people forth for the general election, that's nobody's fault but their own. And I do not understand why that can even be utilized as an argument to try to go to one of these open primary systems or something that goes well beyond the simplicity that we have in the Wyoming Constitution right now. And also, I do want to bring up another question. It was mentioned by the last speaker, and I support him fully. But the LSO has noted that we have to have a constitutional amendment to do this, to do any runoff type of election. I have not found that in talking with folks there that is the case, because the word primary is not even in the Wyoming Constitution anywhere. So I've been working with them trying to figure out where that comes, and I'd love to get a better answer on that as to why we need a constitutional amendment. I don't think we need one for this. I think we can very simply just go forward and put this bill in for runoff elections and move forward. So I appreciate the opportunity to have been able to speak to you all today, and I'll sit and take any questions you might have.
Thank you. Questions for Mr. Miller? I don't see any. Brian, thank you for appearing remotely by phone.
Thank you.
All right. Welcome back to the playground.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Go
and
ahead.
Committee. And I guess I would like to address once again that in our Constitution and our Wyoming Constitution, we do have, and I thought I've rewritten this a number of times and I've left out a whole bunch. And I'm missing it right now, but we do have an article that does have something to do with monopolies. And it does say that they are not part of a creative process. And there was another word that went along with that. I think it was 20. Does anybody remember that in our Wyoming Constitution? And I was looking for it in my notes and I'm not finding it. I should have. Anyway, the problem is that when one system, whether it is two-party system, you can still have a Republican party with precinct people. You can still have a Democratic Party with precinct people. You can have independents in an open ranked choice, however, whatever kind of ranked choice you want. You still have all those options, and nobody is taking that away from anyone. What it does do is it breaks up the monopoly. And right now in some states, there's a Democratic monopoly on the election system. And I'm sure they do not have all the variety of choices that they could have. And in our Wyoming state, we have developed a monopoly on, the Republican Party has developed a monopoly. If you want to have a voice in your, even your regular local, other than city council, If you want to have a voice in any of that, if you want to run for an office, you need to say that you're a Republican. And you become an echo chamber for whatever the national party stands for. And quite honestly, frequently, the issues of New York City are not the issues of Cheyenne or Sheridan. And it's important to have people participating. If we want a healthy government, if we want healthy participation, we need to engage more people. And they need to see government as a viable way for their pursuit of health and the pursuit of happiness. Most people, I know for a long, long time, I was preoccupied with child raising and having a job and all the different things. And I still managed to vote. And I still tried to keep up with what was going on in the nation and the world and in our community. And I do think we use a shorthand, the R in front of a person's name and the D in front of a person's name, the L for libertarian. It's a shorthand for trust. And I think we have broken down that trust by our divisiveness, and people are no longer engaged. And I think we need to open that up. And I think other states are doing it, and I think we can watch them and see from their mistakes. But I would like Wyoming to consider alternatives to our bipolar, and it's crazy. Bipolar is crazy. Anyway, thank you. Any questions?
Thank you. Any questions? Seeing none.
Okay.
All right, anyone else want to talk on any kind of change in our primary election system? Going once, going twice. All right, committee will close public discussion. We're back to where we've been a couple times now. And the question is, where do we want to go forward? What may be workable, or do we like the system how it is? I continue to hear from all sides. No one's perfectly happy with the system. I don't think there's a groundswell on the magic fix. But if anybody wants to throw out a motion for a bill draft for consideration at our next meeting, certainly be happy to entertain that at this time. Or just wants to throw out general discussion to keep the discussion going. 2024 is still a little bit long away, so we don't have to make major decisions this year. Representative Roscoe, go ahead.
For all the independents out there. The open primary does bring independence into the conversation earlier. It is now during the primary. Independents are they're just invited into that stage. It's only after primaries they're brought into the fight. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That's all I have.
Thank you, Representative Roscoe. I didn't hear a motion or anything though, but.
We actually didn't hear, Mr. Chairman, much of what he said. You kept cutting out. And
I think the connection was a little rough, Representative Roscoe, but.
Mr. Chairman, I think he was supporting open primaries and getting independents in earlier. I think that was the gist of it, as well as others, which makes a lot of sense.
True. All right, anyone else in the committee, thoughts, directions? Leaving it alone this year? Senator Case.
I'd definitely like to keep this topic in play. I think last year we had urgency about, and we put forward a proposal for ranked choice because we were trying to help this very election, and that urgency's gone away. It is amazing. We actually do kind of have an almost open primary now, in the sense that 94% of people that are registered are in one party. And pretty much if you're going to be in the game, you got to be in that party in the 94%. The exception, it makes the independent thing kind of awkward now, because they have like a separate process that might be considered a little bit unfair. It's fairly low signature requirement and things. So it'd be actually better when everybody's already in the 94%, just open it up the rest of the way so you can process everybody at the same time. And then Ms. Lowe had an idea for top 4 to go forward and then settle it with ranked choice. I could live with that. I think the runoff is the worst idea because of the voter participation angle. And I look at this as, is the goal of our election to have a majority of Wyoming citizens choose a candidate that's satisfactory to the majority of Wyoming citizens? Or is the goal of our elections to have a minority of people either as a political party or within a political party or within something else control the game so that selected candidate from the minority keeps moving forward in a preferential position? And that's the way I see the runoff under our present system. So, I'd be very encouraged I think that was a pretty good idea. Completely open, 4 go forward, ranked choice at the general.
Senator Scott, still discussion, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I think
Katie. Ms. Talbot. Good.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, I think we need to take steps to try to preserve a two-party system, and I know that's a problem right now. And as I listen to all the options, I'm afraid a lot of them degrade that. And I don't know which the second party is going to be in this state long run, whether it's going to be Democratic or Libertarian, but I think it's likely to be one of the two. What I would like to know is, is there any support in the committee for just a simple bill allowing parties that do not have a candidate coming out of the general election for a particular office to select somebody else, providing it's a member of their party and providing the individual did not run and get defeated in a primary election?
Should we have discussion on that? Senator Case?
Mr. Chairman, I do find that to be innovative, but I think that really favors parties that don't use a primary to get a candidate going forward. That's the way it would. So some parties don't participate in the primary at all. So yet they're going to get a slot on the general. Granted, they do now. It's sort of where does the system get to be fair? Does the system get to be fair because everybody has a chance to participate in November? Or does the system get to be fair because there's a selection process that's sort of like working people through the gates and comes up with a slate of candidates that made it through the gate and then they move forward? The latter seems more fair to me for having people in Wyoming be able to select the one that's most appealing for them in totality.
Okay, Representative Burt, Libertarian, go ahead, thoughts?
First off, I don't think we should protect the main two-party system. I think that's kind of the problem where we're at already. So first and foremost, the election process allows those that represent parties to be dominated by those other members that are in those parties, and here I am, right? We don't primary as a minority party because the way the statutes are set up is we're nominated by a state convention. Now, if we want to work on those statutes and figure out how to work that, sure, that's a different topic of discussion. But if we want to continue to just figure out how to put a two-party system, whether the second party is going to be a Democrat or a Libertarian, then we're no different off than where we're at now. So leaving the system where we're at obviously, the way that our election laws are here within the state benefit the major parties, right? So as a minor party, it became more and more evident as I went through this process. There's a lot of laws we need to change to affect minor parties as well as independents on how we're represented at the ballot. And ultimately, that's where we need to be at, is whatever we do here is getting the equal representation at the ballot for those that feel as though their voice isn't heard. So I had a bill proposal. I wasn't going to throw it out because I don't want to muddy the waters too much, but a multi-member district is something to look into as well, that alleviates all this headache, right? It removes the ability to have to worry about redistricting, and it gives a greater voice to not just my minor party, but all minor parties that feel they want a voice within the state. And it affects a sense of a ranked choice if you choose, I guess, at the minor party. You get the ability for the parties themselves to run their own primaries or their own caucuses and let the parties themselves pay for how they're going to nominate their parties versus, voters all over. So it is a big discussion. It isn't something to take lightly, but I don't believe stifling the voice of minor parties or independents is something that we need to be discussing. So my 2 cents, thank you.
Okay. So we heard from 3 people on the committee. It's an issue and they'd like to keep talking about it, but it's really difficult as a chairman to keep putting it up if we're not going somewhere. So I would really like to have some type of proposal if you want to keep talking about this in October, on at least a direction forward that the majority of the committee here is behind. Otherwise, we probably won't be putting it up on the agenda in October. So if anyone would like to throw out a motion at this time, I would be appreciative. And if no one wants to, that's certainly fine. We'll talk a lot more about alcohol in October.
Mr. Chairman, I didn't mean, Representative Roscoe had his hand up. I'll let him go first.
Representative Roscoe, did you have your hand up? Go ahead, I missed it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I hope this is a little better, and I apologize for the broken up speech last time. I would like to see us move forward with these ideas, both ranked choice voting and open primaries. And getting back to open primaries, it does get independence. Someone that could have been a Republican, say, his whole life and just decided that he has a little bit of a disagreement and wants to run as an independent. And I think that's important for a state like Wyoming. So I would like to see us continue with this. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
So Representative Roscoe, do you want to make a motion? Or Senator Case might make a motion here for you, and we'll see if we're going somewhere with this.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I think we just need to make the motion and see if there's support for it going forward. So the motion would be to have a bill draft for an open primary that would go for the top 4 to be settled with ranked choice voting in the general. And then that's an up and down. And then I would make another motion to have a ranked choice primary system where we continue to have our 2 primaries, but we have ranked choices within the context of the primary. And then add ranked choice to the general to accommodate other candidates to come in.
So the first motion is to have both ranked choice and an open primary top 4, similar to Alaska would be the motion.
Yes, sir.
Okay, is there a second to that motion?
Where's Roscoe when you need him?
Roscoe is seconding. All right, that motion's on the table. Is there any discussion on it? All those in favor of having a bill draft for our next meeting on a ranked choice primary top 4 going to the general, please say aye. Aye. There's 4. All those opposed, say no.
No.
I only got 3, so let me do a show of hands. All those in favor of the bill draft, raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All those opposed to the bill draft, raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And Representative Duncan didn't leave a proxy on that one, nor do I believe anyone else did. I looked through her 5 proxies. She did show up and then leave. So that was not successful. Is there another one, Senator Case, you have?
The other one would just be to move to a system of continue our primary system that we have now, but use ranked choice in that system and in the general.
Is there a second? Representative Roscoe is seconding. So the motion is to implement a ranked choice voting, or whatever the cool name for that is, depending on who testified, for our election system in the primary and general.
It's a runoff.
It's an instant runoff. Any discussion? All in favor of that motion, raise your hand.
I could feel the ground swelling.
There's 4 for that. Opposed, raise your hand. That motion didn't make it either. Any more?
I'll try one.
Let's do the municipal.
Sure, Representative Ayer.
I'll just try draft bill to just run an open primary. Stop to advancing to the general election.
Is there a second? I'll be happy to second it before Roscoe does again. So open primary, all candidates throw their name in, top two, depending on how many seats are there. Move on to the general. Wouldn't require a huge expense, I would think, on our voting systems.
That one sounds like France.
All right, further discussion on an open primary, or jungle primary, I think as it's commonly called throughout the country. Seeing no discussion, all in favor of a bill draft for that at our next meeting, raise your hand. 2, 3, 4, 5. All opposed to that idea, raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, that motion doesn't pass. Senator Boner. And then we'll go to Representative Burt, but go ahead, Senator Boner.
Okay, well, Mr. Chairman, I'll move for an option for ranked choice voting system at the municipal level for nonpartisan races based off of what is currently the law in Utah.
I think it's kind of a pilot right now in Utah, but we could start the same thing here. All right, discussion on that motion. Ranked choice at municipal would be nonpartisan or specifically municipal level?
Yeah, both. And the legislation will be draft whatever the law is in Utah. That'd be the basis.
Okay. So looking at Utah's law and having that presented and talking about that option for Wyoming.
And it's an option.
Seconded by Senator Nethercott. Discussion. All in favor of that motion, raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. There's going to be a table win. Okay. We got a motion. For our next meeting, we'll draft a bill, draft similar to Utah's pilot program to see if we want something similar in Wyoming. Are there other motions? Representative Burt.
You're probably going to hate me, Mr. Chair, but thinking about this, I think we need some work possibly. I'm not sure. I would move to reconsider both of Senator Case's initial motions.
We're still taking motions, so to restate your both of, we want to start with the first one that would be open primary with a ranked choice.
Correct.
Top 4 Alaska system.
Correct.
For a bill draft. You want to second that one again? Hey, Representative McGuire's back.
I'll second it.
That'll make a difference. Okay. So the motion, Representative McGuire and everybody else to rehash, is basically a bill that would copy Alaska's system of an open jungle primary using ranked choice and having the top 4, if there were so many, move on to the general, at least to have that as a starting point of the draft. All in favor, in the second, do you agree with that? I'm assuming still, just for procedure. Okay, all in favor of that motion, raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Should have 6, because he chased his vote, right?
I would think so, but 6. So now I have 1, 2, 3, 4. I believe I have 6 opposed to that. Raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4. All right, that motion is going to pass.
Kind of. Let's go for it.
So did you still want to do another third bill, or we're okay with 2? Representative Burt.
I think on this one, we're okay. I have one. Eventually, it'll get into election, but on this one here, I think we're good. I wasn't too happy with the initial and how that set up, but I think we can work in some of the language and clean it up. So I just didn't think about it, but that's where I'm at.
I'm just happy Alaska and Utah are our models and not Massachusetts or New York or somewhere else. So
I'm always glad to work with the Libertarian Party, I'll tell
we're
you
doing good
that.
stuff. Anything else on a primary system motions on that topic? All right, so the question now, Representative Byrd, is do you think we can do ballot order in no more than 30 minutes before lunch? And if you promise me we can, we'll get to that next. That work?
Let's do it.
Okay, so topic for next is the ballot order. I believe there's a handout in your packet. It's LSO draft 148. Are you presenting then, Representative Burt? Don't need LSO too? Okay, welcome. And we are on draft 148, version 4. And make sure your mic's on whenever you're ready. Okay, it's on.
All right, thank you, ladies and gentlemen of the committee, Mr. Chair. We should be able to get through this one. It's the same bill that I presented in Hewlett that we got the ability to get here. So a little more detail. I don't want to belate this too crazy. I did have a number of questions on why we're bringing this one and some of the confusion on how the statutes are conflicting, and I believe that was Senator Nethercott that had brought that question up. So the handout that I handed you are the 3 statutes that the bill works with. And then for those that aren't here, I sent the email out just while we're a little bit earlier this morning so you can follow along with me. So before I get into the bill, I want to look at the first statute, or actually it could be the last statute on the sheet. It's 22-6-122. And that's the rotation of candidates' names, equal line by voting machines. Now, in that statute, it basically says that the names of candidates in the office shall be rotated on ballots by precinct for all elections. And as we go through elections, that's what we basically assume that all of our ballots are set up. And we never put a lot of thought into that. Now, if we skip up to the middle section of the sheet, at 22-6-122, political party ballot position on the general ballot. This is where the meat of my bill is going to basically work with. So if we look at that statute on section A, the first line there says, political party position shall be determined on the general election ballot according to the number of votes received by each party within the county for the office of representative in the Congress at the last preceding general election. Well, that right there directly conflicts with 22-6-122. If a statute is directly reflected on how many votes a congressional seat gets, then we're not allowed to rotate those ballots. And we look at the congressional, and the preceding was Liz Cheney. As a Republican, this particular statute states that the Republican Party, and it could be the Democrat Party, and if we ever get lucky enough, the Libertarian Party, whoever wins the congressional seat will automatically sit at the top of the ballot. So we'll continue in that middle statute there. The party receiving the highest number of votes shall appear first, following the names of the offices to be voted for. Other parties shall follow in order the respective numbers of such votes. Again, telling you whoever received the most for the party will receive the position of the ballot. Continuing on, the order of any provisional parties will be drawn by the Secretary of State. And then continuing in, any independent candidate shall appear following the last party and shall be listed in alphabetical order. So when we look at how the statutes are conflicting, what it's telling us is if we have a 4-party race or a 3-party with an independent race, we have a Republican, Democrat, Libertarian, and Independent. The way that our current statutes are set up are that the Republican Party will sit automatically at the top of every ballot. The independents going through all the work to get all the signatures they have to get filed and then get certified to get on the ballot. They are automatically, without a chance to be anywhere else, will automatically be at the bottom of all parties. And then the other 2 parties will get to rotate between the middle 2 sections. And then if you get into the top, which is a lot of meat on the format of the election ballot, 22-6-122, within that, it's telling us that if there's a number of candidates representing a party or independents, the county clerk has a discretion and may designate the separate columns and are then separating how candidates are represented at the ballot. So those are the three, and if you have any questions on those, I'll stand for a minute if you have any questions on how the statutes are written.
Any questions? Not seeing any. Keep going.
All right. So with that, it brings me to my bill. And this is a bill that was drafted in the House. It was a personal bill that I brought to the House Corporations Committee, which we brought out. It had a couple of changes in there for committee amendments, House floor amendments, and all those amendments were reworked and were put into this bill as the original, so I made it a cleaner bill, coming out with all the changes that were required or requested. Now in here, we'll start on section 1, 22.6, 122, the format. We're looking on, in the first section, we're looking at the main meat of it is page 2, lines 8 through 13. What we're basically doing there is removing the ability for the county clerks to have a discretion on how they're going to set the ballot up. Within all that, we're moving that, it just basically puts all the candidates in order in a uniform manner. Continuing on to line 15, we're at 22-6-122, the order of the candidates. This is the main portion of the bill on what we want to get done. So basically, we would like to strike the entire section and then add in some language. So the way that the new language would read, for the general election ballot, the names of candidates shall be rotated as set forth in Wyoming Statute 22-6-122. And again, going back to 122, it basically says that all names of all candidates shall be rotated on ballot in precincts for all elections. Each county, the name of each candidate shall appear subsequently an equal number of times at the top, at the bottom, and each intermittent place. And then, of course, voting machines, if that were to get in there. So what this also does is it removes the language that requires independents to also be forced at the bottom of all election ballots. They would have the equal representation and the ability to sit at the top of the ballot, the middle ballot, and at the bottom of the ballot. And we keep talking about we spent pretty much all morning talking about equal elections and how we can have greater voices heard at the ballots. And I truly believe that a lot of the disenfranchised on who our voices aren't heard is because of the results on how the ballots are set up. So I will stand for questions, Mr. Chairman.
Questions for Representative Burt? Representative Ayer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Burt, have you spoken with county clerks and determined this is doable without any added cost?
Mr. Chair, Representative, thank you for that question. So after I went through our corporation, or the House corporations last year, this came out, we've spoken with the county clerks, and they had actually asked me to bring this again once it failed the first time it failed on the House. So we do have support with the county clerks, and really there's no additional cost, not having to readjust anything. We just have to, make sure that it's just positioning. It doesn't take any extra software to get the position right.
Other questions for Representative Burt? Seeing none. Let's call up the Secretary of State's office or the clerks. Anyone else wish to testify in this bill? But I'm hoping both of your offices come forward. Hint. And Representative Burt, you can stay there because we do have 2 microphones. So come on down, Mr. Schoen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Kai Schoen, State Election Director, Secretary of State's Office. I don't have really many comments at all on this bill. As it's written, it essentially functions how we run the primary. So there's no real change to, as far as any administration process that would require additional cost. And so we have no position on the bill.
If I could ask a related question, because we're looking at some amendments here, but in terms of an independent candidate that files a petition and is listed, do they actually have to be independent, or can they be a member of either party? and they just choose to be on an independent ballot.
Mr. Schoen.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Case, independent candidates, as far as being on the ballot, have to be as an independent the way the statutes are written. That does not mean they have to be unaffiliated by registration. They could be a Republican running independent of the party as a candidate.
That's what I thought. Thank you very much. I asked the question poorly. Thank you.
Other questions? Seeing none, thank you, Mr. Schoen. Clerks Association, while you're here, while you're right there, welcome. Mr. Irvin, you snuck up on me.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Malcolm Irvin, County Clerks Association. Just to be clear, our association doesn't have a position on the bill. It may be an individual county clerk that requested for it to come back, not necessarily a position of the association as a whole. To Representative Ayer's question about whether it can be administered and the cost associated, there'd be no extra cost. It could be administered. It's almost identical to how we do it for the primary election. So it actually would provide some clarity and some consistency. But Mr. Chairman, we don't have a position, but we could administer it and could, but it doesn't cost anything extra.
Thanks. Further questions for the clerks? Seeing none. Appreciate it. Anyone else wish to testify on draft 148? No one online. Let me double check Zoom real fast.
Lose members of the party, the Republican Party.
I don't see anyone raising their hand online.
A good time to move this.
All right, with that, let's close public comment. Committee, what's your pleasure on draft 148? Move do pass by Senator Case, seconded by the Representative Blackburn. Okay. Discussion committee members, I would like to offer an amendment. It'd be on page 1, line 13, after all the deleted language. And this comes back to what Senator Case just mentioned. And the motion would be an independent candidate may choose to have their party affiliation listed after the word independent. If I can get a second on that, I will explain. It's page 2. Sure, that would be great, Senator Case, if you would. And then I'll second it for procedural sake. So again, page 2, basically line 13, but really it would come directly after line 8. And so as you know, when you are an independent, you do not have to switch your party affiliation. You just have to run as an independent with the requisite number of signatures. And so other states do a variety of interesting things. I was looking at Oregon's ballot where everybody doesn't claim a party, they claim they lean towards a party or against another party. But this would allow it to say independent libertarian, independent Republican, independent Democrat, independent constitutionalist. You would be able to put that.
Independent pedophile.
It would be a party affiliation as of their last, their current political affiliation as a voter. So that would be the motion. Happy to answer any questions. Or seeing no questions and calling the question, all those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, say no. Okay, that motion is passed. Any other motions on the bill? Discussion, amendments? Seeing none, was the motion, who made the motion?
I did, but Senator Burt, see what he wants.
Senator Cases or Representative Burt, is the motion to move this directly to a committee bill for the 2023 session?
That is correct, sir.
Okay.
Roll call.
So it'll be a roll call vote. Let me check, make sure there's no discussion one last time. Okay. Ms. John, who's calling the roll today? Ms. Talbot, if you'd call the roll.
Mr. Chairman, this is roll call vote on 23 LSO 0148. Senator Boner?
No.
Senator Case? Senator Nethercott?
Aye.
Senator Scott? Representative Blackburn? Representative Burt? Representative Clausen? Representative Duncan? Representative Ayer? Representative LeBeau? Representative McGuire? Representative Roscoe?
Aye.
Chairman Driscoll excused. Chairman Zwaniter. 8 ayes.
That motion does pass. And then committee, just, I know every committee does a different system with proxy votes. And if you remember, Senator Driscoll and I agreed that if you were at the meeting, then you could leave a proxy if you attend the meeting and then leave. And so Representative Duncan did make sure, she was very passionate about some of these bills today. She's on an airplane across country. Apparently the airport plane does not have Wi-Fi. But because she did appear for roll call, it's a little bit of a stretch, but it did fall within the motion that we passed of allowing proxy votes because she did appear according to our Zoom rules. So if anyone has questions on that, that was the conversation I checked with, and Representative Duncan will have some multiple proxy votes today. With that committee, let me double check with the Secretary of State and the clerks if you were planning on being around this afternoon. And I hate to impact everyone's day by going to lunch and then holding off our entire morning agenda. But I guess let me check to make sure you can all come back after lunch. Is that an imposition for anyone? Anyone who cannot testify after lunch that needs to testify on one of our election issues now? Okay, well, with that committee, let's go to lunch until 1:15. Would that be, everybody can get to lunch and back in about an hour and 10 minutes? So we'll recess and come back about 1:15.
Mr. Chairman, you going to lunch in any particular place?
No, I don't.